Hello, everybody. This is your crime thing geek, uh, honorary man king and leader of the Awkward Cop Squad, and member of the domestic terrorist cell, teachers who oppose critical race theory. Welcome to the second part of our discussion of 1984. I have Punchy Gold Sonichu and number one Big Brother fan here today to continue our discussion of 1984. How are you guys today?
Doing all right. Thanks for having me on.
Hello. We are not dead
Hello.
yet. Possibly by the end of the stream, but we'll see.
So I'm gonna start first by kind of roughly summarizing what I recall we went over in the first stream. First of all, there was a lot of talk and spurging out about the limits of the left-right paradigm, and we were talking about other ways to describe the divisions that we see in real-world politics, with some alternatives that we were discussing, including the libertarian versus authoritarian axis. Or I was talking a lot about Thomas Sowell and his division between the constrained vision of human nature and the unconstrained vision.
Yep.
So we did talk a lot about that. We did address the special status of the proles in 1984, specifically that they're viewed by the party as unintelligent animals and capable of understanding or following party discipline. So they have this freedom that outer party and inner party members don't have. We did talk about doublethink. And we talked about the key role of fear and disgust in laying the foundation for totalitarianism. With I know that I brought up in chat the fact that the rats were the thing that finally convinced Winston Smith to give in to the party, is actually very key, because as social science has revealed, disgust is in fact a driver of totalitarianism. We talked about C.S. Lewis's critique of 1984, which posited that because 1984 lacked a real hero, there was a weakness in that book. Because Winston Smith doesn't win, he doesn't triumph. That could be a fundamental flaw in the book. We also questioned whether O'Brien was himself a true believer, and whether inner party members actually need to be true believers, or are they the ones that actually know what's really going on, and they don't actually believe what they're saying, but they're using it as a means to get power and to torture others. So those are the summary of some of the things that we went over in the last stream. So at the end of the last stream, I mentioned that we hadn't had a chance to talk about, and we should talk about today, the role of education in this book, and how it is used to indoctrinate the children and turn them against their parents. And also the erasure of history was a big theme as well. So those are two things that we can talk about today. And we were joking in the pre-show of applying it to modern things going on the internet right now. So who would like to start our new conversation today?
All right. I guess if we talk about the education, it's kind of the first part of the book, right? Because it's sort of like the first part, you see how the world works. The second part is Winston reading about the political theories, right? And then the last part is Winston getting tortured. So I guess most notably would be the spies, right? And adults are terrified of their children, and they're actively encouraged to report on their parents. So very strong, echoes of reporting on your neighbors or reporting on your family in Soviet Russia. And I also kind of like how that ties into the theme of the party undermining deep human connections. They kind of need the family to exist to repopulate the population, but they've spoiled something about the family where children essentially tyrannize their parents. And Winston gets a glimpse of this when he goes to help fix the sink that smells like cabbage. He sees the little terrors terrorizing the mother and has this suspicion that they're eventually going to turn her in. I kind of like the first part of the book because it illustrates the political themes with really simple, really memorable, down to earth things. You're almost kind of getting the parole. I guess it would be the outer party member, but you're getting the ordinary perspective on this before we get into like the giant political theory part of the Goldstein book.
Right. So, as someone who is an educator, when I reread this book about a month ago, and I got to that scene where he's over at the neighbor's house fixing the sink, and there's a description of the mother's face and how she is in fear of her children, as Mar mentioned, and that really hit me to my core as something that is, since the title of this series is frighteningly relevant dystopian works, on this axis, 1984 is especially relevant in our current age, in which there are elements out there that are actively trying to indoctrinate our children so that they can be turned against their parents. And they're trying to do so at ages at which the children cannot object or even critically examine what they're being told. And as a teacher, as I suggested at the end of the last stream, that is something that that enrages me like nothing else. I actually consider it a form of child abuse, really, to take unformed minds that are incapable cognitively because they just haven't developed the ability to. Their children, they're incapable of being able to critically examine what they're being told, and just filling their head with all of this absolute nonsense. And doing so deliberately because the children can't resist, they can't fight back.
And then telling parents that we're not teaching critical race theory because, critical race theory is just a legal theory.
Yeah, the semantic games, bull fucking shit. Like, I'm sorry to be cursing, but the semantic games that these assholes are playing with that critical race theory thing, is something that sends me to the goddamn moon, because we can see it. Okay, the analogy that I think is best is, I think it was Holly Mathner came up with it on Twitter. When you go to a Montessori school, yes, the children are not being taught the theories behind a Montessori education. However, they are in an environment in which the Montessori method is being applied. Similarly, no one is being taught Kimberly Crenshaw in the K-12 level. However, Kimberly Crenshaw is being applied at the K-12 level. So they're being exposed to the ideas that influence this theory without being exposed to the actual technical theory. But it still counts as teaching critical race theory in the schools. So this bullshit line that, they're not reading the official legal theory that started this off. Fuck you. That's not that's not an argument. Okay.
We've awakened the right geek.
Oh, here it comes.
Okay, so this might be like a general question, but I think I can kind of relate it to the book. So like a theme of the book is, will the proles ever rise up? And there's been this phenomenon of parents going to schools. So do you guys think we might be seeing a watershed moment where parents said, I just noticed you're teaching my kids critical race theory, and I don't like that nonsense. Is there any hope, do you think, in kind of like this parental objection to it at these school board meetings?
Well, for me, I don't have any direct experience with this parents' revolt. So Crime Think Geek is going to have to run with this one, I think. I have been hearing in the news a lot more lately that this is happening. It is the parents' revolt is something that's kind of freaking out the proggies up here in Blue State Land. And so I'd just like to take this moment to disavow white terrorism. I fully support critical race theory, and I think critical race theory is the greatest thing since we destroyed Western society, and I disavow whatever crime
The chuckle in your voice gave you away, though. You have to control your voice and your facial expressions.
Sorry,
perfectly.
I microaggressed there, didn't I? Yes, I will check my privilege and work on those microaggressions. So yeah, I have been hearing about that, and I think maybe that's part of it. I've actually got kind of a different take, which I don't know if I should get into right now. Maybe it would be best.
Does it involve the space hunters?
Sort of, not directly. Well, yeah, kind of. Well, the thing is, right? Like, I guess there's this ongoing joke that every show I tend to have hot takes, right? And the last show that we were having, which again, I really hope that Right Geek can get in a lot more time this time, since I feel it's unfair that she was absent for so long in the last one. But one of the things that I was going to get into was the normal hot take that I disagreed with, right? Like, my hot take was going to be that I disagreed with a hot take that I thought was shared by quite a lot of people. Unfortunately, I think I was wrong, because I was going through with the discussion with Marmaduke, and then having discussions with other people elsewhere, like on the internet and IRL, in the analog meat space world. And I started to wonder if maybe the hot take that I thought was common wasn't as common as it was, right? And that is the hot take about Orwell writing about the present, right? And I was going to disagree with that, but since that's not really as much of a hot take as I thought it was, I'm thinking maybe I'm going to run with that as my hot take, at least to begin with. And then later on, perhaps I'll disagree with myself and have like I'll start with the galaxy brain hot take, and then I'll disagree with it and move on to a universe brain hot take where I explain why I'm wrong about everything I just talked about.
To remind the audience, that's the idea that things like Big Brother might be representative of the BBC, IngSoc might just be representative, kind of like like the normie English socialists of
or even just the normie Labour Party, or even like the Labour Party and the Tories at the same time, right? But we can get into that later. I think first, before we start derailing everything, I think Crime Think Geek should explain her perspective from the trenches of this parents' revolt against critical race theory, so which I disavow. Again, I'm very much. You are muted, Crime Think Geek. I don't know if you're trying to speak. Hello, you're all muted.
Sorry, I was waiting for my phone to stop ringing, which I thought I muted, but apparently it didn't work. So, I actually do have a lot of hope in the parent revolt. I am in a state right now that just flipped the governor's mansion explicitly because of that parent revolt. Basically what happened at the tail end of the campaign down here in Virginia is that a bunch of parents, mostly in Northern Virginia, and mostly Democratic, that's the thing that the media is not going to tell you. These are mostly long-term Democrats who they even voted for Biden. They voted for Obama. They voted against Trump. They're not big Trump fans. And a lot of these parents are people of color as well. They started objecting to what's going on in Loudoun County, Virginia. I don't know how much of the headlines you've read about that, but we had sexual assaults happening in the school that were not being properly addressed by the school district. We had, of course, trans ideology being pushed in the schools and critical race theory being pushed in the schools there, and parents at those school board meetings objecting to such things. We also had in Fairfax County the science and tech magnet that is based in Fairfax County, Thomas Jefferson, which is one of the U.S. News and World Report top-ranked high schools in the country. They were forced to change their admission standards so that there wouldn't be a test. It used to be at TJ, you had a test, kind of like in the New York specialized high schools. You had a test that you had to take, and you had to score a certain level on the test to even be considered for admission to the school. Well, they got rid of the test because if there's one thing that the left is against, it's any show of merit or competence. And a bunch of the parents who were parents of TJ students, current TJ students, objected to that and objected to the characterization of their kids, who were mostly children of color. They were immigrants from South Asia and East Asia, largely. They were not white. But of course now Asians are considered to be white adjacent, or they're white now because they're just too successful, but they're not white. And they objected to this deliberate diminishing of the idea of merit and competence. And so they put up a stink about that. And because of those issues that are going on specifically in Fairfax and Loudoun, and in Northern Virginia in general, education became a big deal in our governor's election. And that is the thing that brought Glenn Youngkin over the top, was education. That was the number one issue that shifted a lot of voters that are traditionally liberal over to Youngkin's side. And that's how Youngkin won. So based on what's happening in the ground here in Virginia, which is a pretty blue state at the moment, I think education is going to, it might actually kick off a real proles revolt that might actually make a difference. I actually am very hopeful based on what happened in our recent election in Virginia.
Excellent. So I guess kind of like returning to the book, I guess kind of like the relationship, like as Right Geek said, children, they're developing, right? They're sort of like sponges that are just like absorbing up, shapes and colors. So if you give them ideology, they absorb that up. And it's kind of like you see the spies, right? Like they just become enthusiastic about hunting traitors to Big Brother, right? It's actually kind of like abusing the childhood dream of catching bad guys, and whoever's against Big Brother becomes a bad guy. Right Geek, have you been making applications from 1984 to what you're seeing in kind of like the educational world what you're working in?
Well, there's definitely critical race theory, when it's applied, when the praxis occurs in a K-12 school, especially at the elementary school level. They do what they do is they obviously don't teach Kimberly Crenshaw, but that's not the point. They boil it down to very, very simple concepts that are easily digestible by these little kids, and then the kids, being the little sponges that they are, they absorb it and then they think it's true, because again, they don't really have the abstract critical faculty to actually look into it in detail. So I'd say there is a direct analogy between what's going on in real life in education and what goes on in 1984 with the spies, making it attractive, making it fun. The fact that there are entire YouTube channels devoted to pushing this ideology on children with fun little animations and songs that you can sing. And,
queer kid stuff, right?
Yeah, that kind of thing. It's absolutely directly analogous to how the spies work in 1984, for sure.
Okay. I guess I'm going to have to jump in here and ask the unpleasant question. But is the problem here right, that we object to the idea of indoctrinating children before they've developed critical facilities and are able to think for themselves? Or is the problem that we object to the things we're indoctrinating them with?
Right. Because you'd have like this post-modern argument that you always have to indoctrinate them with something. So we're just going to indoctrinate them with our preferred format. So maybe on like the one hand, I kind of like take the position that, yeah, there has to be a moral framework. We're never absent a moral framework. I guess it's almost kind of like a both and thing. I do object to the content of the propaganda itself, right? So there's this element that, yeah, they're teaching children, but they're also teaching children an evil system. Maybe you could kind of like additionally say you always assume that children learn by stages. So maybe like the objective, like nonpartisan way of looking at it is, should you teach a child about systems of racism and their participation in racism if they don't know what year the Civil War happened, right? But it's kind of like an order where first you learn the facts of history and you kind of like rotely memorize that. And then once you know, like, do you know that the Roman Empire wasn't 100 years ago, right? Like once you get to that point, now you're finally ready to start thinking critically about the, I guess, like the controversial or interpretive, the interpretive side of things. Does that make sense? It's kind of a counterpoint, Punchy.
Yeah, well, again, I think this is kind of getting back to this galaxy brain take that I suppose I'm going to run with. Again, I disagree with this galaxy brain take in certain aspects, so possibly later I can argue with myself and contradict myself on many points. But one of the things with Orwell specifically in 1984 is this idea that 1984 isn't a dystopia in the classical sense, right? Like it's not so much him predicting the future as it is simply him making a veiled allegory about his present, right? His present and his past is actually the focus of 1984. And again, you know, we could get into a whole bunch of stuff with this. His experiences at the BBC, you know, he was involved in censorship, the BBC, the Big Brother Corporation, things like Room 101, you know, memory holding, with the spies, right? And all of this indoctrination of children into the welfare warfare state, where they're always looking for the enemies of Ingsoc and Oceania, and they're constantly playing soldier and shooting people and going out and glorifying Big Brother. You know, this isn't actually, this wasn't a new thing. This wasn't something that was going to be happening in the future. This was something that was happening in Britain for hundreds of years, right? Britain was in many ways, it was the birthplace. Britain and Prussia, in many ways, they were the birthplaces of jingoism and nationalism and you know, these kind of old Britain as the great lion standing astride Europe, and as the feisty bulldogs who've got to go out and kick the Russians out of the Crimea, right? You know, and all this kind of stuff. It's been going on for centuries, and even in the middle of the century, right? You know, when we had the groundwork for 1984, you know, Britain was locked in conflict with the continent, obviously. You know, Germany, everybody knows that, you know, the fascists were very militaristic and they had their own version of the spies, right? They had the Hitlerjugend. And Britain was also locked in this sort of ideological conflict with Russia and the Soviets, right? You know, the bad Stalinists. But in many ways, Britain was doing the exact same thing, right? You know, maybe Britain had more allowances for private property, right? But Britain actually had one of the largest militaries in the world at the time. It had the largest empire that the world had ever known, up until after the Second World War, when colonialism accelerated and they had to the cost of the war meant they had to pull out of everywhere, and then leading to this influx of post-colonial studies and critical race theory indirectly, right? So yeah, I think in many ways, for Orwell particularly, who was, he was kind of an anarchisty leaning socialist lefty commie.
Very anti-nationalist. Yeah, that's a consistent pattern throughout the book. Yeah,
very anti-nationalist. I mean, it's in many ways it's just a critique of nationalism, and that's something that wasn't exclusive to Nazi Germany, which. Again, most people who look at 1984 and who try to place it in historical context, right? You focus on Nazi Germany or you focus on Stalinist Russia, and you say that they're the evil guys. But nationalism and warmongering, indoctrinating children, right? That was happening in Britain. That was happening in the United States, right? As late, in the 1940s, there were young children playing cowboys and Indians, right? Going out and glorifying. I don't want to say genocide because that might sound a bit too woke, but
right. There's a gap between the child's playful understanding of the world and then the graphic quality of the world. This is the same thing with exactly. Like Columbus, right? Like, yes, Columbus was responsible for killing people. Columbus isn't famous for killing people. Lots of people throughout, like, history is just a long slaughterhouse. The reason Columbus is famous is that he brought the New World to the attention of the European West. That's the thing he did that shaped history, right? So it's almost like I sort of see like there's a devilish lie within kind of like the postmodern critique of the West, where they make correct observations, but it's almost the problem is that they're not correcting the narrative; they're just substituting a new narrative. So the narrative that that blacks were brought over on slave ships is a true historical narrative, but they'll leave out critical details like black slave owners or the Islamic slave trade. They adjust it. They adjust the narrative and create a new narrative that serves a new purpose, right? So maybe I want to connect this to Orwell, because I actually kind of resonated with this, is that Orwell, as like an old socialist, yes, maybe he's critiquing English socialism and the collapse of the Marxist ideal into this collectivist oligarchical tyranny. Yes, he does seem to think that nationalism is a critical propaganda tool. So I've always kind of read Orwell as a guy who never lost his kind of like dream of the Marxist ideal of the proletarian, of the good Marxist revolt, but now he's so jaded that the sad ending of the book is his saying this isn't going to work. We're never going to get that socialist ideal. That's kind of like how I interpret it as a narrative. And maybe like how much of Orwell should we just kind of like blindly accept, right? So I think for Orwell, it's completely critical that they have nationalism as a propaganda tool to whip up the proles and the outer party. Could Orwell even kind of conceive of an internationalist collective oligarchical empire? It sort of seems like he needs to have it divided into nations for it to make sense to him why white people live this way. And kind of like with hindsight, we now look back and say, oh, well, now these globalists seem to be the guys who want to be the oligarchical collectivist overlords for all of us, right? So it's sort of like things have developed since Orwell that I think add to his picture. But I still find value in that picture. Like I'd say, yeah, I believe in nations. I believe nations should exist, but I'd of course say, don't, as a Christian, I'd say don't worship the nation and maybe don't allow a kind of hoorah, like for me, there'd be like a difference between me liking America and me saying, "Hoorah! I like America. Therefore, the CIA does nothing wrong because they're Americans, right?" And if the CIA are Americans, then they can't possibly spy on anybody, right?
Objective ethics based on a deity rather than what society. I disavow that. I thoroughly disavow that. Come on.
Okay. If I want to speak to some things that I'm hearing from the two of you. First of all, number one Marmaduke fan, when you talked about the stages of learning, that is exactly right. I teach math. So when I teach math, you start with can they count? Can they add? Can they subtract? And then once you know addition and subtraction, then you say, well, multiplication is just large addition, and then division is just, subtraction multiple times, basically. And you build yourself up from the very basic building blocks of something up to progressively more complex things. When it comes to history, yes, again, in order for students to interpret history and draw moral lessons from it, they have to know what actually happened, good or bad. And this sort of gets to your prior question, Punchy. Do we have a problem with it because it's indoctrination, qua indoctrination, or because it's indoctrinating in an evil system? I think I'm leaning more towards the second answer. The problem that I have with the indoctrination is that the children are being indoctrinated into something that's fundamentally false. Our job as educators, in my view, is to teach children the things that are true. The problem with the current indoctrinators is they are not teaching children things that are true. They are teaching children things that are fundamentally false and can be shown to be false by looking at the actual historical record.
Through the selective presentation of facts. It's exactly just like how the media does it. Yeah.
Right.
You choose what you cover.
And to address what the postmodernists often say, that, oh, well, in the past, they were being indoctrinated into something different. Yes, that's true, but that doesn't make your indoctrination any more right. Yes, it was true that, in the early days, certain facts of history were glossed over in order to favor one particular perspective. But the answer to that is not to gloss over other facts to present a completely different, contrary perspective. Okay, the real answer is to talk about what's true, the whole truth, and not just this partial truth that favors your particular skewed view of the world. And as far as teaching children history and how to draw lessons from it, you do have to do it in stages. You have to teach those who are children who are at the elementary level, are essentially in what classical educators like myself would call the grammar stage. And at the grammar stage, what you have to learn is you have to learn all the basic facts and fundamentals about the thing that you are going to build your education around. So how can, as Marmaduke was saying, how can students understand such concepts like systemic racism and stuff like that until they actually know the grounding baseline facts of what actually happened factually in history? And that's the problem with the current indoctrinators, is they're trying to impose this interpretation on students who don't even have the basic grammar stage facts of the situation yet. Marm, you definitely had it. And Punchy, your question, I think, does in fact reveal what the actual issue is. The issue is, yes, obviously in education, there is going to be some moral framework that's going to be taught. That's unavoidable. But in my view, that moral framework has to be based on truth. If it's not based on truth, then it needs to be pushed out of the schools entirely. You can't sit there and teach kids that, for example, the earth is flat and say, oh, well, people indoctrinate people into thinking that the earth is round. So therefore it's okay to indoctrinate kids into the fact that the earth is flat. No, screw you.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I guess I hear what you're saying, and I agree that it would be nice in a perfect world. It would be nice to teach children the truth, but whose truth are we teaching?
All right, so I feel like I sense the direction of Punchy's question, right? So
Yes.
is it so if there is a moral framework, then the big question is, well, what's the moral framework, right? Is it classical liberalism? I guess for the right geek and myself, we were kind of pushed out of the culture by the classical liberals, and now I feel like the classical liberals are directly being targeted by the postmodern stuff, like things like color blindness were sort of classically liberal ideals. They're like by name being named as the evil that critical race theory seems to fix. So if there has to be a moral system, is maybe like the question is classical liberalism enough? Do we even want classical liberalism to be it if it seems to have led to this new evolved thing? Should we establish the Christian empire as an alternative to the postmodern one?
Deus Volt. Sorry, I disavow that too. I know that's hate speak now, according to Paradox Interactive.
I've been thinking about this a lot, and what's tough is I've always felt like there are aspects of classical liberalism that I like, right? It's the cliche of the baby and the bathwater. If I feel that classical liberalism kind of created a world where it was hard to make value judgments, and classical liberalism sort of helped create the world where Christians were just not participating in the intellectual elite anymore. I guess Christians sort of retreated into like theological colleges is where Christian intellectual energy went. On the other hand, I always feel like, well, I don't really want to go back to the time where Catholics were burning Protestants at the stake and Protestants were burning Catholics at the stake, right? So it's tough, right? Because there is really a big philosophical difference, not just between theists and Christians and classical liberals, but even between different groups of theists, right? So maybe the question is, are we just permanently stuck because of the human condition in a state of where we have to fight it out? Or can we ever get to a point where there's like enough of a peaceful public square where those differences can be like mediated in the schools, right? Can we have classical liberals and Protestants and Catholics and normie Democrats fighting, or does one have to predominate in the culture?
I have some thoughts. On the question, whose truth? Let's unpack the underlying assumption of that question, which is that there are multiple truths that have validity. That seems to be the underlying assumption, but I don't accept that underlying assumption. I think there is the truth that can be discovered, and that is the thing that should be taught. And
does this mean in the schools? Do the schools then have to become sort of like fact centers, right?
Yeah. Are the schools the fact checkers? Are they going to get their Hillary Clinton blue check mark or something?
Yeah, there you go. So
well, here's the thing I'm going to add on top of that. There is such a thing as the truth. I don't think that the truth can be taught in our current system as it is designed. Actually, in reality, I happen to be a radical abolitionist when it comes to the public schools. I think it was a horrible, horrible mistake to have education become the purview of a state monopoly. I think that to get around what?
The Ayn Rand geek. The Ayn Rand geek going hard.
When it comes to schools, yeah, I think that to get around the whose truth question, well, number one, there is the truth. There are not multiple truths. And then number two, yes, people are going to obviously dispute what the truth is because people are looking at it from different frameworks and different life experiences and stuff like that. How do you get around those disagreements about the truth where you give people maximum freedom to explore what that truth is and to communicate what they think that truth is? In the school setting, that means that different groups of parents should be able to decide on their own how children should be educated. And you can get around this whole conflict over what should be taught in a state school by just not having a state school. State schools are terrible and they should be abolished.
Okay, well, I'd actually be inclined to agree with that in the sort of prescriptive sense. I do think that state schools are problematic. And actually, ironically enough, I think that answer, abolish state schools and have parents decide for themselves what their children should learn, is itself a very postmodern approach to the question of whose truth, right? Because basically in that kind of system, it's every family's truth is kind of a free-for-all, and you're allowed to determine the truth for yourself and for your own children, which of course is at complete odds with the basic progressive mindset, which is that there is the one truth, which is the truth that the technocracy can reveal through scientific management and all these kinds of progressive rational ideals.
It's sort of like there's a division between postmodernism as an intellectual movement and postmodernism as practiced, right?
Yeah. So well, I mean, there's a lot of different permutations of it, just right. Like we were getting into with like left and right. Like, there's progressives who are very sort of po-mode. There are progressives who are very like vanilla mo, right? Very modernist progressives who still have that idea. Yeah.
So an example I've seen of that is there's actually kind of like a common, I'd say maybe either leftist or postmodern criticism that our school systems were based on sort of military institutions. Yes. Why should military institutions be the basis for our school systems? And then instantly, like, Christians start resonating with that and saying, yeah, because now the military institution is indoctrinating my children to dislike Christianity. So as soon as you're the out party, you become more aware of how the society is marginalizing you.
Right. Exactly.
I'm even using postmodern language to describe it. Yeah.
So get rid of the system that requires indoctrination of any kind, and just have, as I say, a total free for all. Because I believe in kind of a classical liberal sense that if we have the total free for all, where people are able to discuss and learn and do whatever the heck they want in the knowledge sphere, that eventually truth will out.
Well, so this is
the marketplace of ideas. Yeah, sort of like, it's not enough to talk about the ideal of the marketplace of ideas. There actually has to be a place where it functions. If we theoretically have the right to participate in the marketplace of ideas and the tech companies don't let anybody talk, we don't really have the opportunity to exercise this right, or for the right to mean anything practically. Like, the abstract principle in philosophy is actually supposed to undergird a reality. The abstract principle of the right to bear arms is supposed to undergird the reality that you actually have an arm so you can defend yourself and defend your castle. So I don't know, are we just like universally in agreement of abolishing the public schools at this point?
Well, I was going to say, because that's actually one of the things that I was going to get into with Orwell specifically, and Orwell critiquing childhood education with the Prussian school system, the old military drill schools, on which public schools are based. And well, they're not based, but based in the other sense, not the based sense.
In the verb sense, not the adjective.
In the verb sense, yes. Public schools are woke, but they're based on.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, the Prussian system is the basis, not their based. Yeah.
Should I briefly touch on what it is, or do you guys want to explain what the Prussian system is?
I'm only I'm only like generally familiar with,
Yeah, I mean,
with the topic,
same,
so yeah, I'd be
same with
interested.
me. But basically, my understanding of the Prussian system is it was this old system from the 19th century that focused on turning the workers and the proletariat into good citizens for the state, right? People who would be able to work in the factories and fight in the battlefields without too much complaints, right?
But is this pre-Marx?
I think it was around the time. I think it's a little bit pre-Marx. Yes, it's around the same sort of time that it got popular, though. Right, Geek? Is that correct? Or you probably know more about pedagogy than I do.
What I know is like how it came over to America, and that was basically a bunch of 19th century American educators came over and observed the Prussian system and said, this is awesome, let's bring this to America, because at the time America was trying to absorb a large influx of immigrants from Europe primarily, and we have to assimilate all of these immigrants that have come in by the job lot, right? So this Prussian system will be a fantastic way to do that. Get everyone all lined up under the American system as we understood it at the time.
How closely related is it to the classical system? Like, what distinguishes it from the classical system?
Well, I think it's the end.
The classical system, before we had widespread state-run public schooling, is mostly there was sort of independently functioning Latin schools and so on. And most kids were actually educated in their homes. It was the original homeschooling by their mothers, oftentimes. So it was generally home-based. And those who wanted to proceed beyond just learning the basic literacy and basic arithmetic, they would go on to a local Latin school somewhere, which would also be a fairly small institution run by a headmaster of some kind who had some education to him. And then they would prepare to go to a place like Harvard or something like that. And that's kind of how the system worked before we imported the Prussian ideas. But the Prussian ideas, as I was saying, were very attracted to American educators of the 19th and early 20th century because of this influx of immigrants that we were experiencing at the time, and the need as perceived by these educators to assimilate all of these people into this one American system. So, like, at its root, public education is all about making everyone identical cogs in the American machine, right? So at its root, it's fundamentally problematic.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say that the main difference is the emphasis that the Prussian system places on on its pedagogy, on what it wants to teach children, right? And I think like we've got this idea that this very romantic notion of education where kids go to school and they learn to think and they learn truths and they learn science and reading and arithmetic, and then they come out better informed, bright young people who can think for themselves and can engage with the world in a meaningful way, right? But that wasn't actually the focus of the Prussian education system. There was a great quote that I'm trying to find, which I can't find it, so maybe it's not that great of a quote, unfortunately. But it was basically about trying to teach like farm kids to become the next lawyers or doctors or whatever. And the idea is that no, we're not going to teach like Jimmy low IQ farm boy to be a lawyer and a doctor, but we are going to instill civic values, and we're going to get him used to waking up on time, right? Because this is something that I think at least in America, right? School kids have a sort of instinctual revulsion towards school, right? Having to wake up at 8 o'clock in the morning and then going to class and then sitting in class for watching the clock and waiting and being bored and then waiting for the bell and then getting out of school at 3 or whenever and then going off to do sports and then having this regimented time frame thing, right?
There's a reason Bart Simpson's a hero, yeah.
Yeah, there is a reason Bart Simpson's a hero, and it's because he's pushing back against this element of the Prussian school system, which is instilling civic values and turning people into, as Reitgeek describes, cogs in the machine, right? And actually, I'm looking through for these quotes, and it's saying that it actually got started in the 18th century, or at least starting to originate in the 18th century, which would actually make sense because that's when Prussian drill became really popular in the UK, right? And even the United States, right? The early colonial armies, right? The Continental Army was trained by Prussian drill masters. So that would make sense. So this has been going on for centuries now. It's not something that was new, like to return to Orwell, right? It's not something that he was anticipating in the future or something that he was saying, well, mean old Uncle Hitler and Joe Stalin are doing this stuff, but, guard yourself well, free men of the West, right? No, like he was saying, like, yeah, we've got this kind of stuff in Britain, in Airstrip 1, in America, in all these places of Oceania, right? The free West, quote unquote, has these Prussian drill, turn kids into good soldiers and good workers for the industrial state, right? So that I think is a problem that's been faced with. It's been built into our public school system, and I sort of agree with Reitgeek in that public schools should be abolished. I do think there should be options for education for the working class. I think it's a lot easier to get nowadays. So we could go into a whole spurg about is public school justified, but I think I'm going to avoid that for now. Because I'm going to say that, returning to something that you both were touching on earlier, I think I actually disagree with both of you in regards to truths and morals and how we should be teaching those, right?
In the sense that objective truth doesn't exist as a category?
Well, no. I mean, I would be inclined to agree that there is an objective truth, right? Like there was that Build the Blizzard thing, right? Where he said that there are many ways to look at something until you know the answer, in which case there's only one, right?
Right.
I'm going to keep coming back to that quote because it's brilliant. I loved it. But the thing is, like, specifically in regards to morals, right? I don't know what the truth is, right? Like I'm going to just say that flat out. I don't know what the true moral system is, and I think that's even from like studying ethics and taking philosophy in school and having philosophy professors in my family, right? The more you learn about it, the less sure you are of the truth.
Something I've always thought is just because I believe in objective truth doesn't mean it's simple.
Yeah, I mean, I can believe in the concept of objective truth, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I know what the objective truth is, right?
Okay.
But I will say that I think what should be the focus, right, is less on the moral dimension or the facts, as Reitgeek was pointing out. Reitgeek was pointing out that we should be teaching facts, right? And my question would be, like, whose facts? What facts? Right, history is so complicated that everybody's version of facts is leaving something out.
Or if you present true facts, but you present certain true facts, then
or
the
even
students
just
will come to a particular conclusion.
You can lead them along, even if you just present the true facts in a different order than the other way. You know, you can kind of lead kids down certain paths. So I think that we should abstain from teaching the moral truths, as Marmaduke argues, and abstain from teaching the factual truths, as Crime Think Geek argues. Instead, you're like, what the hell am I talking about, right? Like, what's left? Instead, I think what we should be focusing on, especially for younger children, is teaching the ability to think critically for themselves, right?
The ability to, how do you teach yourself at home, right?
Yeah,
how do you read? Yeah.
How do you read? How do you do these things, right? And I think in many ways, like the focus on grammar is very good, right? Like, just focus on, don't teach history or anything, except maybe, like, you know, vague, very vague, very cursory.
The Roman Empire happened here, and then the Middle Ages.
Yeah, there was some
and
Romans,
then the Renaissance,
and then there were knights, and look at the cool little knights, and then. Yeah, don't really dwell on it. Just focus on the grammar, and
so,
you know,
when I was talking about the importance of a moral framework, you know, one of the things I was thinking of is, if you don't have the public schools, then what you could have is, you could have private schools, you could have homeschooling, you could have your weird experimental hippie school. You're actually allowed to try a lot of different things and see what works. And parents have a special motivation in raising their children, but then we also have maybe like this economic problem where, if the parents feel like poor wage cuts, right, and the mother feels like she has to get a job doing data entry to prove that she can have a career, like who's going to educate the kids if not the mom, right? So there's this catch-22 where there needs to be enough wealth and security that the home can exist as a structure for education and for upbringing. Yeah. Well,
that's kind of why I'm somewhat sympathetic to the public school argument, right? Like, especially nowadays with the wagey getting cagey, you know, needs to eat tendies, shakes and fries kind of thing. But I mean, like for example, I can say from my own experience, you know, I've sort of touched on this before, but I went to a number of different schools, and the schools varied in quality from very, very good to very, very poor. And some were private, some were public, some were like hippie schools, right? Like, my mother actually taught at a hippie school for a while. And the weird thing is, the entire time, I don't think I had any lessons in basic logic and critical thinking. I had one class in like my fourth form private school, posh private school, where they went into formal logic and critical thinking. And one class in fourth form, which is like 8th grade, 9th grade, something like that, like very relatively late in my educational process. And speaking from, probably is preferable to having your kids brainwashed by pinkers. Yeah. Well, one of the issues is that you're going to have, if you're
what if you had a not bad public school? All right, so like Punchy, how familiar are you with like school choice discourse?
Somewhat. I mean, I have my strong opinions on school choice discourse. You know, I'm fully in favor of teaching the controversy, right? You know, just as I'm in favor of, you know, I think parents should be free to like we went over Ken Ham in previous things, right?
Okay, yeah.
I think you know, and like everybody knows, like, and Right Geek was talking about flat Earth, and Mom, I think you brought up flat Earth as well, right?
Or maybe it was young Earth creationism, one of the two, yeah.
Yeah, well, both of these ideas, like flat Earth and young Earth creationism, you know, these are all kind of like controversial ideas, and I'm of the mind that the best way to see the divine truth of Darwin and sacred evolution in nomine, Darwinus or whatever.
You
Right?
almost can't understand it without understanding what he was critiquing.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I think you need to understand the counter arguments, and then kids, if they're provided with the right framework to think, right, critical thinking and logic, the scientific method, right, the actual scientific method, not like Fauci, believe the science, right, believe what we tell you about the science, right, but actually understand what it is to engage with an idea in a scientific way. I think if you provide that to kids first, and then provide the kids with the facts that Crime Think Geek was going into, right? At that point, kids can just neutrally reach their own conclusions, and some of the kids might reach the wrong conclusion, right? Because there are, or what I would argue is the wrong conclusion, right? Just give my postmodern caveat here. Right, I don't actually know what the truth is, but I'm fairly sure that the truth is that we're not living in a young Earth creation system. And some kids may still arrive at that conclusion, given all the facts and allowed to reach their own conclusions. But I think enough kids will see why evolution is preferable to young Earth creation, at least in like a factual sense.
So what I've been thinking about a lot is that's a mentality difference, right? Like you could have a creationist teacher who says, "I really want you to come to your own conclusions on this. Let me give you the best argument for evolution." You could theoretically have an evolutionist teacher who vigorously supports evolution and could have the exact same logic. I really want you to come to the evolutionary conclusion because you think it's right. Yeah.
Independently of what the teacher actually believes. And I mean, there is a sense in which that's a moral position, right? Like going with Big Brother fan, that is a moral proposition. That is a moral thing that I believe that people should have the right to think for themselves and to work out things. But I think, again, my whole argument here, the crux of my argument would be that the first thing we need to do is teach children critical thinking and logic, which isn't something that just magically comes to kids. It's something that they really have to get used to from an early age. And then once we have kids who are sort of smart enough and inquisitive enough and free thinking enough to engage with ideas without, flipping out and, going like Trigglypuff, like, get the hate speech off our campus kind of stuff, right? Once we have kids that can do that, then we can allow the kids to engage in the marketplace of ideas. We can bring them the facts. We can have, like I know in college, right? When I was there, I mean, I had teachers that I completely disagreed with, but that was fine because, I was at a place where it was expected that you'd engage with ideas in a sort of challenging and radical manner, right? And maybe they'll convince you, or maybe you'll convince them, or maybe you'll just part ways and get a bad grade, but that's fine. So that would be my idea. The basis isn't going to be moral or factual, it's going to be methodological, if that makes any sense.
And almost like personal. Sorry, Carmi.
Yeah, I do have to throw a wrench in that works though. The problem with your proposition, Punchy, is that what we have found, if you look at actual cognitive psychological research, is that critical thinking can't be done unless there is a substrate of factual knowledge on which to do the critical thinking upon. So, like, for example, these.
What kind of factual knowledge? What form of factual knowledge?
Let's talk about reading, for example. Yes, one of the things that you must do when you're educating a child is to teach that child to read. And that goes beyond just teaching them how to sound out the phonemes, although that's the first thing you need to do. But the second thing you need to do is you need to teach them how to comprehend what they're reading. And the only way that children can comprehend what is being read is for them to have some sort of general knowledge base of if you're reading stuff written in the English language, you basically have to have a knowledge base of Western civilization. You have to understand what certain idioms mean in the English language. You have to understand when somebody references, say, Pollyanna or George Washington or Abraham Lincoln in a text, you have to actually know who those people are to actually comprehend what that reference is referring to. So while we do have to teach students critical thinking and logic and rhetoric and all of those things, the classical form of education that I align with and that I prefer doesn't start there. That's not the first stage, because you can't really critically think if you've got nothing in your head to think about. So unfortunately, we do have to select some kind of factual knowledge that has to go before we start teaching the logic and rhetoric.
To illustrate, Aristotle's famous syllogism about Socrates assumes that you know that mortal people stay dead once they die, right? Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, Socrates is immortal. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that would just get into the basic grammar, though, right? The basic rules of grammar, very fundamental things. My sort of pushback would be that when it comes to like facts, right? Like we can teach them facts like man is a word that signifies, you, or possibly your sister if she decides to, right? Disavow man, right? But we can teach these basic facts, but when it comes to sort of more complicated like historical facts and narrative facts, right? Like with race, these kinds of things, we can kind of leave that aside until after we've imparted the critical thinking aspect, right? That would be my position. Like I do agree that you need a substrata of facts in order to think critically. Like you need to understand language before you can really think, because a lot of our thoughts come through in like we tend to think in grammatical senses, right? Like we think in sentences or ideas come to us, and it comes to us in the form of language. So if we don't have that sort of factual basis of language, then it can be really hard to think critically, because we're operating like on the level of instinct or intuition or whatever, which maybe some hippies are okay with, but I think that runs counter to critical thinking. But I think beyond just the facts of language, right, those simple facts of language, which getting back to 1984, right, Newspeak, one of the core components of Newspeak is the breaking down of language and the control of language, which is one of the reasons why people can't think critically in 1984 anymore, because the language has been neutered and directed in such a way that it precludes any ability to think critically.
Not just the language, though; they've also robbed them of their historical knowledge.
Which, well, that's true, but I think that's subordinate to the language, right? Like I think the ability to think critically, like if you can think critically, if you have that understanding, like Winston does, that history is being replaced and that people are changing history, right? Then you can push back, and you can say, yeah, this is terrible that they are erasing things and censoring things and taking things out of the narrative, and I'm going to tell other people about this, and it's this meme that this meme idea that infects the populace, and it won't be crushed, because even though they're trying to change the facts about history, you still have the factual basis of language with which to resist, right? It's the capacity. It's like the difference between having a shotgun and not being able to defend yourself against state aggression, right?
So I'm gonna be Hegel and try to find the synthesis between the thesis and antithesis here. All right, so I would agree with the proposition that it's important to teach children to think critically so that they can begin the process of self-education, right? Like the everyone's best teacher, story involves a teacher who got them excited about learning the subject, so that they actually want to learn it and actually get excited and start learning it on their own. So like teaching them the enthusiasm to learn would be similar to teaching them the process of, I guess critical thinking would mostly be like a problem solving exercise, utility, right? Like it has like massive far reaching utility. But so I would actually then kind of like agree with Right Geek that the problem with critical thinking in isolation is critical thinking about what? And then again, in sort of like the postmodern dimension, you could say that a lot of their theories involve critical thinking and involve the critical deconstruction of previously existing structures. But maybe the problem with it is it's what Tolkien would say. It's like it's like breaking apart a thing to find out what he is. He who breaks a thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom, says Gandalf to Saruman. If all we're doing with the critical faculty is ripping everything our culture and our society has, we're not using the critical faculty and directing it towards any productive ends. And your example, Punchy, sort of assumes the practical end of self-learning and of becoming the kind of educated mind you need to be to resist the real life, the real big brothers of the world. So I would say yes to the critical thinking, and kind of like the broader context of the world, and sort of understanding that you exist in history and people exist in time, and a value structure. But my way of presenting a value structure wouldn't be my value structure is the value structure. I am God in this classroom. My way of presenting a value structure would be, I have this value structure. This is how I look at the world. I want to teach you to look at the world in such a way that you are learning, you're critical of your value structure without abandoning the idea of value structures at all. You want to be searching for what the good is without abandoning the quest of seeking for the good. So if it's assumed that there's a good or a true thing you're striving for, it's also assumed that you don't have the 100% handle, you don't have the 100% dogmatic handle on truth if you're looking for it. And at the same time, it's got to be out there, or else why search for it at all? Why engage at all? Why not just play the video games and live in the virtual anime girl world?
Yes. Meet seat tendies.
The thing with critical theory and all things that flow from that nexus there is that it's a misnomer. It's not critical at all. It basically holds to a almost fundamentalist religious idea of this is how the world works. You're not allowed to question it in any way.
It's critical of the previous structure. Yeah.
Oh, I'd agree. It's critical in the sense that it's criticizing the previous structures, but it's not critical in the sense of like it's critical thinking. It's not critical of itself. It's critical of everyone else.
Yeah, and I would say that I think we're all in agreement that we want people to be able to, when they come out of their education, well, you don't actually come out. Really, you should be educating yourself your entire life. But when you come out of formal education, let me just put it that way, that they be able to, in the genuine sense, criticize or critically examine what they're being told, and how it aligns with the actual truth, the actual objective truth.
Yeah, I would concur. I do not disavow. Yeah. Although if somebody does contact me and says that's hate speak, I will happily disavow. But until then, I do not disavow. So
yeah, but again, I would say that I would go back to what I was saying before, that we can't understand when we're learning how to read. Just as an example, we can't understand let's say, a passage in a reader about Abraham Lincoln, unless we know who he is, unless we can, hang what we're reading onto some sort of knowledge that already exists in our brain. We have to have some sort of schema in our brain already that we can hang this new knowledge onto. So, and furthermore, I would say that we can't critique something unless we have access to a certain knowledge, by which we can say, no, I don't think that's correct because I know fact X, Y, and Z. So while we agree that critical thinking matters, right? I really doubt that it can be taught in isolation without choosing some.
I guess here's a question for you, right, Geek? Because I was just thinking about something Big Brother fan was talking about before. It was the Aristotle is a man thing, right? He's immortal. Now, my position obviously is that like critical thinking is the basis. But let's say that I don't know who Aristotle is. Let's say that I'm not an ancient Greek. Big brain take, I know. Imagine me not being an ancient Greek. But let's say I have no clue who the hell Aristotle is at all, right? Can I still understand that, that proposition about Aristotle is a man, Aristotle is mortal, he's going to die, like that kind of thing? Can I still understand that?
You can understand
if I don't understand
on the basis of
context.
abstract logic. You can understand it, and assuming you understand what the words mean. Yes, you can make sense of that without knowing it comes from Aristotle.
Yeah. Without knowing like the cultural context of ancient Greeks, or the history of the city-states that I was living in, or anything to do with ancient Greece, right? Like you'd agree that I wouldn't have to know any facts about being culturally Greek or nationally Greek or anything like that, right?
Sure.
So I want to see if we're actually agreeing or disagreeing. I want to see if we're actually agreeing or disagreeing. I think we'd all agree you can study the subject of logic in isolation. You can literally learn abstract logic, and so we don't talk about things. We talk about A and B.
I would say yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you do need like basic facts, as in like what is a man, right? But beyond that, like I don't think you need facts to start learning logic.
Well, he's
like,
a miserable pile of
Martian
secrets.
and what is a man?
For something like that, I would agree. For something like that kind of basic syllogistic reasoning, I would agree. But I'm talking about like what Edie Hirsch has talked about more complex reading in the English language requires some basic cultural knowledge.
I mean, I'd agree with that. I'd say like, having cultural knowledge is important, but my perspective would be that could come after learning syllogistic logic, right? Like the basic critical thinking, the basic syllogistic logic, learn that first, and then start getting the facts so you can have cultural dialogues and enter into the narrative of Western canon, right? That would be my kind of thing. Like, I don't think we disagree fundamentally. Like, I think we all agree that facts are important. We all agree that morals are important. And we all agree that critical thinking is important. I think maybe our emphasis is just in different avenues. One thing I was going to say too, this is a complete change of subject, but I found this several minutes ago. Were we, I think we were talking about this before the show, but with disgust and how that's being used, like in 1984 as in real life, how that's being used to push totalitarianism and authoritarianism.
In the last stream, there was a lot of discussion about how, for example, in 1984, periodically some quarter of prole sector would be bombed just randomly. And we were discussing how, Oceania was allowing that to happen deliberately so that people would be in this constant underlying state of fear. And when you're in that state of fear, then you're going to think less critically about what's going on. And we also talked about how we did talk about the connection between disgust and totalitarianism, which has been observed in social science, and how and I was saying last time that Orwell may have instinctively understood that, and that's why he chose rats as the thing that would finally break Winston Smith down.
Yeah, well, I found that that article in that book. It was by guy called Joel Kotkin. The Coming of Neo-Feudalism, A Warning to the Global Middle Class. It's fairly recent, and there's been some like op-ed pieces based on.
I know the author. Yeah.
You know,
go ahead.
Like you know him personally, or you just
no?
I'm
familiar with him. I've heard the name.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he's a legit author then. He's not like some crank on.
No,
on
he's not a crank. No.
Okay. Yeah. Well, because he's been making these kind of observations. Specifically with like. I would relate it to the what Orwell was pointing out about the inner party, the outer party, and the proletariat. Right? It's this tripartite division of class into like the three estates of the clerics, the nobility, and the proletariat, or the bourgeoisie, or the peasants, or whatever you want to call them. And basically, he's making a similar argument to Orwell, is that the inner party is going to be the ultra wealthy, or in Orwell's case, the ultra wealthy comparatively. Like they're not wealthy, but they do have a lot of power. And these guys correspond to like the old noble class who controlled the state, right? The state is that entity which declares a monopoly on the use of force, right? It reserves a monopoly on the use of force over a specific geographic area, right? So these are the people that have the guns and have the tanks and have the bombs and tell you that you can't have guns because otherwise you'll be Kyle Rittenhouse. And then the clerics, the clerics are the educators, the administrators, right? They are the people who learn. Where there's a good quote here about it that tells the moral and cultural story. I don't know. There was a even punchier quote about that, but basically they learn the morals and they transmit the morals and culture of society to the next rungs, and then everybody else. And specifically, like these articles have been going into like COVID and how this kind of class division has been expressing itself through people's attitudes towards COVID. And what people are starting to observe is that the very wealthy, right, they're concerned about COVID, but they're not overly concerned about COVID. It's the cleric class, right? Like the upper middle class, the educators and the journalists. These people who are really gung-ho about COVID, who wear the masks indoors, who hold parties where they talk about getting vaccinated, right? There's a story here about like a young boy who flipped out because he learned that there were like unvaccinated people in his school or something like that, right? Like had a trauma reaction, like that kind of stuff. And then of course the proletariat who doesn't give a shit, like they're walking around like even last year, I'm living in a place that's been hit pretty hard with COVID, and even last year, there were people walking on the beach, milling around with not a care in the world.
I saw a 10-year-old boy riding his bike outside, nobody else around, with a mask on.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. So there's that division, and I think like the interesting thing for me, just getting back to what we were discussing in the previous stream, was this idea of whether the inner party believed their cultural mythology more than the outer party or less than the outer party. And the thing that sort of Kropkin and these others are arguing is that the inner party, in fact, does not believe the mythology as much as the outer party, which I think was my position as well in the last one, right? Like the reading that I got from Orwell.
So the clerical professor believes in Marx and believes in intersectional theory, but
believes in a lot more than.
But Jeff Bezos, he doesn't care about.
Yeah, George Soros and Jeff Bezos, right?
Well, but George Soros does seem to really sincerely care about this like international borders stuff.
He
right?
cares a little bit. I don't think he cares as much as he lets on, though. I think he's very opportunistic because, again, you guys. This is going to get us shut down pretty hard. But you guys heard about his history with the Nazi Party and turning Jews in.
I think I had heard that. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen interviews with him, like old television interviews, where he discusses it quite candidly. Was when he was a young boy, right? Like he worked as a collaborator, helping Nazis basically round up Jews. And,
why can't we get him canceled? Wouldn't that be a dream if we could have all of the rainbow-colored kids on Twitter canceling George Soros?
He pays for the cancel culture, so no, you can't go after that. But I think the idea is that, like, I mean, some of these people do have a moral direction, right? Like there was that oh god, what the hell is his name? I keep forgetting his name. I bring him up like every other stream. The guy who said that it's moral to become really rich so that you can then turn around and be a moral busybody. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that. Huh.
Yeah, well, there's like an anti-Ayn Rand guy. What else moral? Oh God. He's also big on like animal liberation and the moral obligation for the.
I'm still trying to imagine the anti-Ayn Rand in my head.
Yeah, he's another one of these like ultra wealthy associated guys, but basically, like, the idea is that a lot of these rich people they do believe that they have an obligation to use their wealth to help other people in a proactive way, right? Like the duty, your moral duty is to accumulate wealth so that you can then use that wealth to be the change you want to see in the world, as opposed to like Ayn Rand,
which set of changes, right? Like, does that take a position? Like, do they care if you are a right-wing philanthropist or a left-wing?
I mean, yeah, they do. I mean, most of them really care, but. The thing is, I don't think they care as much as the clerical class does, right? Like the middle class and the journos and things. Like, I think those are the true believers. Those are the people that really believe in the mythology of the system. And you even saw this in the Middle Ages, right? Because there's this idea that you had the nobility was constantly battling with the clergy, and one of the things that the clergy always had a gripe with the nobility was that they weren't Christian enough, right? They didn't believe in I'm going to use the term mythology. I don't mean to imply that Christianity is myth or anything, but you know what I mean, right? Like,
right. We both read Loomis, right? So we have like this with the TX sense. Yeah. They have this Christian cultural framework, and the clerics are the ones. Usually, like some of the clerics are very cynical, especially the wealthier clerics tended to be pretty cynical, which of course led to things like the Franciscans, right? Going woke and trying to fight back against what they saw as the corruption of the church. The Protestants too, right? Things like that. Mm-hmm. But I think in general, the clerics believed in the Christian cultural narrative a lot more than the actual ruling nobility, right? Like the knights and like
the
Frederick the Wise, the Holy Roman Empire. I think it was Charles II. Who was it? Dang it! But there were like political interests that made it so that they didn't want to go after Luther because we're kind of more worried about our political rivals right now than some German monk. Thank you very much. Yeah.
yeah, that kind of thing. So I think there's this idea of history being a circle, right? History is a flat circle. Wasn't there like a quote from a movie or a video game about that was really good? I I don't know.
The one I
but-
always hear is history doesn't repeat, but it echoes.
Okay, that's
the
kind
line
of
here.
that's kind of good. But yeah, this idea that contrary to what the sort of Marxist and progressive vision of like an evolutionary history where things start from simple and primitive and cruel and then gradually get towards the millenarian coming of woke utopia or whatever. History has a tendency to just have the same kind of crap happening over and over again in cycles, and I think this is one of those cases where it's just part of human nature, right? For the very wealthy to not believe in the stories that support them as much as the slightly less wealthy who create the stories to support the very wealthy, right? So that would be my take in regards to that, and I think people are starting to notice it with COVID as well.
Yeah, I think that mid-level acts the way it does, that act as the true believers because they really want to get into that upper level.
Yeah.
It's very much an attempt to grab at status.
Yeah, Peter Singer, I think,
guess
was it.
that's a problem with I think it's a problem with the bipartisan system in general. Is you have the theory. In theory, you have upward mobility, right? So you could have middle class people aspiring to be upper middle class. You could have upper middle class who aspire to join the ranks of the elite, and then the elites who want to be the Jeff Bezos, right? Like how you could tripartite any of the classes into even smaller systems.
Yeah, like they're all trying to claw their way up, like a Sarkeesian or something. She knows that she's part of the upper middle class, but she wants to claw her way up into millionaire and billionaire status or something like that. So I think there's an aspect
and
of
it has
self-interest.
less. I feel like it has less to do with income or personal wealth, and more to do with social status. The kid who comes from an upper middle class family where his parents are professionals, maybe professional journalists or professors or something like that, who has just gotten out of college and he's now working at a Starbucks. He is cash poor, but the way that he was raised is very much an upper middle class mentality. And so I think,
Oh yeah, I know that well. I know the feel.
So it's not. I think that like defining it by like who has $1 billion or who are the millionaires and billionaires, I think that has less to do with how the classes fall than the status that they are granted, which might have nothing to do with income at all, although there's definitely a correlation between your income and personal wealth and how much status you have in society. It's not a 1-1 correlation.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would think that the biggest dividing factor is actually power rather than simply income. But yeah, I would agree that it's not just income. And again, that's something that Orwell was getting
anonymous.
into. Yeah,
power
and
or status is synonymous. Yeah.
Yeah, power is the key, and that's what what's his face
O'Brien.
O'Brien, yeah, that's the gist of O'Brien's big villain reveal to Winston is
not about making the world better. It's about power. It's about applying power.
Even more than not about making the world better. It's not even about like making your own life better.
Consciously torturing the proletariat as part of the point.
Yeah, like because this is something that I think Orwell kept coming back to, and he was really bitter about because you look at like the sort of classic capitalist, like the evil capitalist, right? The evil capitalist is concerned with becoming extremely wealthy.
With the top hats,
with the top hats, like they just want to have a lot of money. But with O'Brien, he admits that he's actually quite poor by historical standards, right? Like his standard of living is no better than that of like a lower middle class person of Britain pre-war or whatever, pre-revolution. But what really makes him, get all fuzzy and tingly inside is the fact that he has so much power by being a member of the inner party, right? He has power over everybody in society. So the fact that he's poor, dirt poor, and living in, like a little hovel or something, as long as you're the one in the hovel and everybody else is like living underneath the broken wreckage of, post-apocalyptic
Or
New
as long
York
as
or
you have
something.
the power to put them there. Yeah.
Yeah, and you have the power to be like, okay, yeah, you're going to go do this. Aha, I'm going to cancel you now, right? Like that's what matters to these people, right? This sort of oligarchical collectivist group. Once capitalism is defeated, all that's left is this lust for power, and that's a really scary thought. Actually, that they don't care about the wealth; that it is just pure power. So,
Yeah, and I would say like when in fandom, when we get into the whole diversity discourse and who has the power, and people in fandom who are of color cannot be racist because they don't have the power. Bullshit. We're gonna awake the white geek again, because if you are able, you could live in an apartment with 6 roommates and making $10,000 a year, right? But if you have the power to walk into a Starbucks, accuse it of being racist, and force Starbucks to shut down so that all of their employees have to sit through this bullshit diversity training to appease you, you have power. I don't care how poor you are. I don't care how shitty your apartment is. You have power.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think this is actually something that a lot of like fandom, like Comicsgate kind of things, and Gamergate, like geek culture that's been pushing back against woke culture.
But like the people who are turning it's Iron Fist now. Iron Fist can't be white anymore. He's got to be Asian. The people who work for these
because Asians do martial arts, right?
Yeah, the guys working for Marvel and DC are wage cucks like the rest of us, but they are getting a power rush from
I think
destroying your childhood.
I think that's something that a lot of these fandom geek commentators miss, because there's this idea of go woke, get broke, right? And everybody here has heard that, I trust, right? Everybody in chat, I'm sure, has heard that. Which is true to a sense, but I don't think it really matters that much to like really committed wokies, because it's not about it's not about money.
They don't care about the profits. They don't want the profits. They don't care. They actually think profits are disgusting. Yeah. That's kind of the impression that you get from them. What they want is the cultural power to influence people.
Exactly. It's about power. It's not about money.
Related. About so much. So Twitter as illustration. I always think of like Twitter as a giant id machine. It just proves that we have this like these base desires, right? So many Twitter hot takes or put downs are wryly written jokes about how you're stupid or low class or live in your mother's basement. It's the power of saying I have all of this wealth, influence, and status, and you with your anime avatar, I just assume you have none of it. I don't even know you're an insult. I'll just call you an insult because that shows how much higher I am on the status totem pole than you. No one gets paid for that.
Yeah, actually, Molyneux used to talk about that a lot before he got deplatformed and unpersoned and memory hold for being a Trump supporter. But he was constantly going on about how power is a drug, and that people, because one of his big critiques against the state, he used to be an anarchist before Trump showed up, but one of his classic critiques against the state is that the idea of being in the state, right? Becoming a politician. The people that want to become politicians need to want to have power. So whenever you elect somebody, whenever you get a politician in charge, these are just by their very nature, they're going to be people who are addicted to power and who lust after power and who primarily are motivated by power, right? And there are maybe a few cases where that's not the case, right? Like if you look at like the old like Roman history or something, right? You always get these stories about people who come to power, but they don't really want the power, right? You know, this kind of stuff. But that's become incredibly rare these days, and it is, I think, because of this idea that people who get into politics and people who gravitate towards like big government, you idolize big government because you idolize the idea of having power over your fellow man and being able to control them and tell them what to do. So yeah, hopefully we don't get cancelled for that, but Burb. Oh no, we lost Right Geek again.
Oh no, be right back. All right.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, she was here for almost 2 hours.
A big chunk of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, was it technical issues or just she had to grab something, you know? Right.
Okay. Yeah. Hopefully she will be back. But yeah, so you want to do like a song and dance number now? Like,
oh sure, yeah. or we finally now's the part where we undump all of our creepy internet lore that
about
Right
like
Geek has remained innocent of.
About Shad and Lotax.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So Lotax was involved in something awful.
Something awful. Yeah. The website. That might be too old internet for you, Mom. Maybe not old enough.
I feel like I used to see something. I didn't frequent it, but I used to see something awful post all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. It was the same with me. I never really got involved with something awful. Mostly because they charged $10 for you to sign up for their website.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, that was the big thing. That was one of the big controversies, was that the guy who ran at Low Tax was charging people to
high tax
users. Yeah, high tax. Then he got beaten up by Yui Ball, the video game movie. Did you ever see that? That's great. If you can look it up online.
Video game movie?
Yeah. Have you ever heard of Yui Ball? Or
no, I haven't.
Bull, or whatever his name is. He's the guy that did House of the Dead, and I think he was trying to do some of the Resident Evil movies.
Okay, I'm back.
She's back.
Hello. He did the Postal movie.
Yeah, I was just checking something in my house. It wasn't my internet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I
got paranoid for a second. I had to check something. So
basically, if any of you wanna laugh, you can look up Uwe Ball. He's a notoriously bad filmmaker. He's honestly he's probably the filmmaker that I hate the most.
Better or worse than Monday Matt?
Well, I mean, Monday Matt's kind of, but he. Oh, you mean Low Tax or
no? Yeah, UA Ball, is he better or worse than Mundane Matt in terms of movie? Have you ever seen like Mundane Matt's movie?
No, I've never seen his movie. I mean, Mundane Matt might be worse, but as far as an actual professional filmmaker who gets like big budget movies released to theaters, like this guy, like he releases stuff in cinemas, and there was this big conspiracy theory floating around that he's actually taking advantage of like some German or EU tax laws by purposely making terrible movies that bomb at the box office, and then companies can write that off as a loss and get tax rebates from the German government or something.
The plot of the producers.
Yeah, basically, he's like the real life producers guy. But look him up sometime. He's been really terrible. But one of the great stories of the early internet was that people were making fun of him on all these geek websites, including Something Awful. Like they were saying, oh, like these movies are the worst. Alone in the Dark is the worst movie I've ever seen. He's such a terrible filmmaker. And like, have you guys ever seen Jay and Silent Bob's movie? Like the old
what's his name? I haven't seen it.
I know nothing about this lore, so you guys.
Kevin Smith. Well, Kevin Smith, right? You're familiar with Kevin Smith, right? Like the comic book.
Oh yeah, and now he has like a YouTube channel. He's coming up movie maker. Now he does like YouTube movies. Screwed up He-Man, right?
Like he did a movie about two of his characters where they get into fights with internet trolls, and then they threaten to beat up the internet trolls over their movies. And it's this really surreal scene, but that actually happened in real life with UV Ball, because he was reading these negative reviews, and he's like, well, if you don't like me, how about you come fight me IRL, boy, you know, that kind of stuff. And a few people were just like shit posting, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, we'll fight you. So Yui Ball booked a fight with his internet trolls, like an actual professional boxing match. And Lotax is probably, I think he's fought a couple people. Lotax is the main one that he fought. It was like some Vegas promotion or something. Maybe it was in Panama. I don't know. It was like a major fight promotion, and he went out and he got absolutely destroyed by UV Ball. So if you ever want to see something funny, if you ever want to see an internet nerd get his face punched in by a hulking German filmmaker who does like video game movies for a living, just look up Lotax and UV Ball's fight.
And this is before like the internet blood sports stuff, right?
Yeah, this was. I'm pretty sure this was prior to Bloodsports. It may have influenced the whole
genre.
The whole genre. Yeah. Okay. Lotax versus Yui from 15 years ago. Jesus. So yeah, old internet lore. But this fellow, you know, he rose and he fell and he killed himself several days ago.
Gosh.
So. Yeah, I mean, he'd been going out. Something Awful has become a hive of scum and villainy. There's a lot of transsexual rights stuff going on, transgender rights things going on, like tons of trannies there. Lotax himself was actually recently doxxed. Like some internet vigilante sleuths found out that he was filming transgender pornography in his mansion, like based on like some wall molding that was behind a model in the background of a photo or something.
Wow.
So he's been at the center of like some spiraling controversies, and there was something about him having to pay child support for his ex-wife, and a judge ruled against him, and he couldn't take it anymore. So R.I.P. Lotax. And R.I.P. Yeah, going back to the point.
Going back to 1984.
That's more idiocracy. Than
Internet memes are just like Big Brother using machines to create pornography and novels.
We should do idiocracy at some point. At some point in the future, we should consider idiocracy as a dystopia, because that would be.
That actually fits in with the theme of the series. Yeah. In some sense. All
right, but to
go back to what we were talking about. To go back to what we were talking about people wanting power, seeing power as a drug. That's actually not a super new idea. Actually, John Adams, our second president, in a lot of his writing, he observed that human nature hungers after what he called esteem, which is basically power, status, basically.
Yeah, but I mean, he was racist, though. I mean, that's just something the racists would say.
If anyone ever did anything wrong at all in history, that means everything they ever said can be discounted.
Yeah, actually, that was.
John Adams was actually anti-slavery, so.
Yeah, right. He was still racist.
Well, that's the thing.
He was still white, and he benefited from the white power, the white privilege, white power political structure of the day. So, and actually I was going to ask, why do they call that school Thomas Jefferson School near where you live? Because don't they realize that Thomas Jefferson has been cancelled, ostensibly for being racist and owning slaves?
Well, I think they got him I think they got one of his statues at one of the last riots. Yeah.
Yeah, because Fairfax County just hasn't gotten around to it because they've been busy changing the name of schools, like those that are named after Robert E. Lee and stuff. So I guess they just haven't gotten around to it.
Oh, you had a lot of Robert E. Lee schools. That's pretty basic.
Oh yeah, we have tons. We have a Lee Highway. The where I live is 2 miles down the road from Lee Highway. So,
Just say it's Bruce Lee. Say it's named in honor of Bruce Lee. I mean, he's a great Asian American. Come on.
Yes, we've got Robert E. Lee's all over the place, and roads, namely, and Jefferson. There's near where I used to live was a highway called Jefferson Davis Highway.
Oh God! Okay.
Which, as far as I know, it's still called Jefferson Davis Highway. They haven't changed it yet. But
yeah,
I'm
well,
sure
nobody
they'll get
knows who
around to
he
it.
is. I mean,
Yeah.
That's the trick. Is the cancel culture kids are idiots. So it's when they find out about something in history that they suddenly all awaken and need to go to work.
Yeah,
It's
you're
good
never
that
going to
they're kinda
find out.
stupid.
They're never going to figure out who Jefferson Davis is. They'll think he's like some sitcom character or something.
I found out who Jefferson Davis was through Animaniacs, so that's the thing. If it's in a cartoon, they'll figure it out that way.
Was that an Animaniacs? Did
Yeah,
they have,
Jefferson
like, a
Davis.
civil-
He competed in Jeopardy again. Yeah, it was Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, and General Sherman played against Stonewall
God.
Jackson, Jefferson Davis, and who's the other?
Oh God,
senator?
how is that
Yeah.
not cancelled? That's horrible. Did
Well, because
did
it
Robert
has
Bolton
Lincoln concluding that the cause of the Civil War was to end slavery. So it's a very pro Northern skit from the Animaniacs.
Animaniacs sing along, Lincoln speech openings, presidents. I don't know. I'll have to look that up later. It looks like there's a whole episode.
Okay, wait. It's called Hysteria. Yeah, it was like a bonus cartoon they showed after Animaniacs. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, that's I mean, I'm still salty about the whole Thomas Jefferson thing because I remember like 6 or 7 years ago or something, attending like an opening for some local artist guy who'd been sponsored by the universities, and basically like it was some pretty interesting stuff. Like I liked what he was doing with the canvas because he had like. His big things was having like canvases that had been slit and cut together, and you could like lift them up. But basically, the idea one of his pieces was that you had you had like a portrait of Thomas Jefferson, but then you lifted it up, and it turned out he was racist, right? Like like this kind of thing. And my issue with that, like, I mean, besides the fact that Thomas Jefferson really wasn't that racist by the contemporary standards, and you know, he kind of set the intellectual groundwork for actually dismantling racism.
Yeah.
But what I was wondering was like, okay, like let's say that you criticize Thomas Jefferson and you overthrow him and you seek to replace him. Like, what are you going to replace him with, though? Like in the American mythos, and it seems as though like, I mean, is that? Well, yeah, communism, but specifically with like founding fathers, right? Because you still need to mythologize the American nation state, right?
Well, the party is what created the American nation state. Just like you were saying to me on Twitter the other day when I was saying, I distinctly recall my dad saying that he skipped studying for a test so he could watch Roots. But sure, tell me that white people don't talk about slavery. And you were like, no, the party invented discussions of slavery. There were no discussions of slavery before the party started them.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think nowadays it's shifted to mostly Hamilton, though, hasn't it?
Well, okay, I have some thoughts about Hamilton, which completely fascinating to me about Hamilton is it's essentially a normie Democrat trying to make his version of the founding, where he's sympathetic to the founders, which means some conservatives hate Hamilton because, oh, well, they're making him do rap and they're not white,
you
right?
mean
Like
the musical, right?
Right, the musical. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I guess we
haven't
could
actually seen
transition from the musical to Hamilton, like
But
everybody.
yeah, no, I think that's important because you know that was just a little bit before I think Hamilton came out, if I'm remembering correctly, or at least a little bit before everybody started talking about the musical. But yeah, the musical thing. So go on.
Right, and then the woke intellectuals, once Hamilton becomes like a hit, you know, like Broadway musical, right? So it's making the rounds amongst like kind of like white normie Democrats. They recognize the theme of the play and they hate it for a different reason than the conservatives. They hate it because he's saying that the American story is also a story for Hispanic kids and black kids, and they don't like that. So it's sort of no, it is. The leftists are insistent that no, the American story is just for white people. Dang it, it's not multicultural. Dang it.
Yeah, well, the thing that really gets me, right, like leaving aside, because again, I haven't actually seen the musical, so I don't have any thoughts one way or another on it. I'm sure it's fine. I mean, I sat through Rent, and that was about, you know, glorifying the AIDS epidemic.
Way better than Rent, yeah.
Okay, that's good. But
it's way better than Rent. I saw it on Broadway, and Marm is right. As for what is its actual theme, it is in fact basically appropriating the American story and saying, yes, this belongs to minority immigrants too.
Well, maybe it's talking about race, but is it talking about monarchy or about central banks or about the idea of having?
Yes,
okay, I haven't thought about this.
There are entire songs devoted to the debates in George Washington's cabinet about things like the central bank and stuff.
Okay, so they do make it explicit that Hamilton is in many ways like a precursor to the warfare welfare state kind of thinking.
Yep. They brought up some of that stuff. Yeah.
Okay, and people still like look at this and aren't like, hey, hang on, Alexander Hamilton's.
They're sort of portraying him as like a complex figure, right? I'd say like most of the emphasis is on personal stuff, like his cheating on his wife and things like that. So the idea is he's this imperfect man with a big vision for the world in a lot of drive. Yeah.
Well, see,
I guess Lynn's method was to like mention these controversies, but not let them bog down like the drama of the musical. But you do get some like you get some red pill moments on Hamilton, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe I'm just really cynical, but I think that's kind of how you get the foot in the door, right? Like just as you have like a little critique of Thomas Jefferson, where like, yeah, okay, you know, there's some nuance. He did have affairs with black people, which is bad now, even though it was good 10 years ago. And it's probably going to be good again. Right. But once you get that foot in the door, then it very quickly becomes, well, he's racist and we gotta destroy all mention of him, and we've got to stop talking about classical liberalism and limited government and individual freedoms, which were all things that Jefferson instantiated quite passionately. And with Hamilton, you know, it'll be like, yeah, okay, so maybe Hamilton was this new world order bankster goon who was looking to bring the lizard people in to control your life and enslave the entire country. But, you know, maybe one of his relatives was black, so, you know, it's kind of, he's a complex figure, guys. And then the complex figure part gets left out, and everybody just kind of remembers him as like, oh, he's that quirky guy with the fun musical that was written about him. Gosh. And then as soon as you get into college and you start reading about his views, you're already primed to agree with, you know, that kind of Hamiltonian approach to democracy. So, I mean, maybe that's just me being cynical, but I think this is all part of the lizard people plan to replace classical liberalism with collectivist, oligarchical collectivism. So I denounce Hamilton on that.
Yeah. Lynn is a lefty, so it is going to express a lefty idea for sure. But I think Marma's right too, that it's interesting.
Well, so he's a standard Democrat lefty then, not like.
Well, there's like a line where they say immigrants, we get the job done. For Lin-Manuel, what he likes is that he likes Hamilton as the immigrant. It's almost exactly like how a lot of comic book writers now look at Superman as the immigrant. Yeah.
Is that actually true though? Because I have to admit, I don't know enough.
It's not historically true, no, because where he came from in the Caribbean was still a part of the British Empire, so it was like an internal migration, not an actual.
Even beyond that, because I don't know anywhere near enough about American history as I should. But my understanding was that there was even some question whether he was part POC, like a POC person. That he may not have had as much black in him as some people seem to think, or that was just kind of a racial slur that people were using to.
I don't think we know anything about his racial background. But we do know that he definitely came. He did grow up on a Caribbean island. And,
yeah, I mean he was
a bastard. He was in fact a bastard in the technical sense. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in the metaphorical and technical sense. Sorry.
I think it's hilarious that basically no one in that generation liked Hamilton. I got kind of obsessed with. Yeah, I got obsessed with John Adams around the year 2000 or so.
Yeah.
So I read everything I could that was out at the time on John Adams, and it was hilarious that John Adams was going off on how terrible Hamilton was, and they were in the same party. Nobody liked Hamilton, not even the Federalists.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, you gotta.
Yeah.
I mean that does. I mean, silver lining here. I'm just gonna kind of try and white pill people. Maybe one of these days, like 300 years from now, people will look back on Ron Paul very fondly, and he'll be the new champion of the United States government. Even though everybody kind of hated him and thought he was a crank and looked down on him, even in his own party.
The bit I always remember is when he was at the Republican debate and he misheard a question, so he like put his ear like an old man.
What happened?
Oh, this was ages. What would it have been? It would have been 2008. Yeah, it would have been his 2008 run, I think.
Ron Paul debating. That's just bringing up way too much stuff. Do you remember what exactly where it was that?
Oh, I can't remember that particularly. I know that he just did like say that again thing. Yeah, and he like flipped his ear.
Yeah.
A very specific, vivid, pointless detail. I remember.
Was that like a meme or something then?
I actually don't know if it was a meme at all. It was just like a weird moment in the middle of the debate.
It was a meme for Marmaduke. It was a mom meme.
Yeah, I specifically remember it.
Yeah, well, I mean, hopefully, and maybe Goldstein.
Talking about Jefferson and Hamilton and how people are canceling Jefferson, for example, because he owned slaves. That actually gets us to the other theme that we were going to discuss tonight, which is 1984 and the theme about the erasure of history. Or the constant rewriting of history, right? So, and this is also relevant to our current context. Again, the title of the series is Frighteningly Relevant, Dystopian Works. The fact that, in my state, statues are being torn down, and I have no love for the Confederates. I don't think anyone reasonable really does, but I have an instinctual dislike of the idea that we're going to start tearing down Confederate monuments that exist in Virginia because, first of all, that's somebody's artwork. That's somebody who put in effort to create a statue that you're now destroying and taking away. But secondly, if you remove all of those physical reminders that this is a thing that happened in Virginia history, then it is, in a sense, a way of erasing that history.
Yeah, well, it's funny because like you look at, well, it's not like ha funny, but it's funny, like odd funny, and it's not even that odd funny when you really think about it. So I guess it's not funny at all. But it's predictable. I'll say it's predictable from my kind of black pill perspective. But if you look at like an anthropologist, right? There's this classic story in like anthropology and archaeology, where people look back at the past, like when the Christians showed up in the New World, right? When the Spanish Catholic Church showed up and started tearing down Incan and Mayan sculptures and monuments, right? Or when they were in Italy and they were defacing old like homoerotic statues and big willies
Carve a cross on it, yeah.
Carve a cross on a pagan god, or chop someone's willy off because you can't have that in context, right? This destruction of indigenous histories, it's uniformly looked back on, like through the lens of history. It's looked back on as a tragedy, right? Like, how could people have done that? How could the Catholic friars have shown up in Mexico and completely destroyed the Incan culture and erased their gods and defaced their monuments and all these kinds of things? But then when we look at today, iconoclasm is still going on. There are still people that will do it without even hesitating, and many of the people who are fierce advocates for iconoclasm, right, they come from a cultural background where if you presented them with any other form of iconoclasm, that wasn't like, hey, we're going to attack like white Christians, they would be justly horrified, right? Like, not even like a decade or two. When were the Buddha statues blown up by the Taliban? It was like 2 decades ago, right? Like,
yeah.
right before the invasion of Afghanistan. Like, that was one of the big atrocities that was really being pushed in the media, in the Democrat media, about why the Taliban was bad and why they were loose cannons or whatever.
They throw gays off of rooftops, therefore we need to invade.
Well, that's kind of getting now that gays are the big hot button issue. Now they care about gays getting thrown off, but before that, it was the Taliban really blowing up those old Buddhist statues in Afghanistan. I forget what the you know what I'm talking about though, right? Like, there were these iconic Buddhas.
I gotta be honest and say I actually don't remember that story. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about though. Yeah.
Let me see. The Buddhas of Bamiyan. That was it. 2 6th century monumental statues. They're like the size of the Statue of Liberty or something. Like, they're huge, huge statues of Buddha that were carved into the face of a cliff, right? Like, they're absolutely amazing looking things. But apparently the Taliban showed up, and there's some like controversy about exactly why. Like, I've heard some people saying that they actually did it because, like, not because they wanted to erase Buddha, but because they wanted to put in like oil fields or something, or like Western powers weren't allowing them to get a trade route, so they flew it up to kind of divert things. I don't know. There's something was going on. But the proximate effect was that they blew up these priceless cultural artifacts of Buddha statues, and everybody, all the Democrats were horrified by it and condemned it. And then a couple decades later, the very same crowd, that was horrified by the destruction of priceless Buddhist artifacts is now back on board with iconoclasm. And if you look at it from the perspective of the Taliban, right? Like, according to their worldview, according to their truths, Buddhism is every bit as offensive as racism. I mean, possibly even more offensive than racism and slavery and Robert E. Lee, having Robert E. Lee on a school sign or something. So yeah, it kind of makes sense. So, like, is it okay to blow up things that you don't like? Oh, shadow ban. Who got shadow banned?
I think we did, because Warzor didn't get a notification for the stream.
Oh no. Okay, well, I mean, Matt did show up earlier, so he must have got a notification. So hopefully Well, whatever. If we are the dead, we are the dead. So hello, hello, with the board time lord.
You mentioned you mentioned what's his name? I'll think of it later. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but
Okay.
yeah. So the erasure of history in 1984. What other thoughts might some of you have on that particular theme?
I'm gonna troll Punchy a little bit and kind of like remind us of the part of the conversation where we were debating about, you know, critical thinking versus the value of other forms of information. It strikes me that a lot of this stuff involves people with their own history, and not just history as a thing in and of itself, but as history as a thing that informs a way of people think. So getting back to like, why did old Democrats get mad about Buddhist statues, but they either turn their head and cough when the Confederate statues come down, or are actively tearing down the Confederate statues? Well, I would say like people feel more guilty about their own history than anything else, especially for an American. The guilt of slavery is something an American feels in a way. I think that a non-American doesn't feel that. Therefore, the critical race theory can grab a foothold because people think, wow, that's right. If I was raised back then, I might have been a slave owner. Wow, that's right. My great-grandparents weren't slaves, so and that is having an effect on me, right? We're not separable from our history, and if you're ignorant of it, you're easy to manipulate.
I would be inclined to agree. I think it is quite a bit easier to blow up something in your own backyard than it is to approve of somebody else blowing up something in their own backyard. I was going to push back by saying, well, it's not really in their history, but they are Democrats, so I guess technically it is in their history. It is, in fact, in their very recent history. You know, as people may recall from the 1960s and 1970s. So yeah, I mean, I guess in that sense, you know, it is very relevant to.
What is it? Is it the 1924 Democrat National Convention that you're not supposed to Google?
Well, any of them. I mean, even like, what was it, Robert Byrd or whoever it was, like the old Democrat senator that
Hillary took photos with.
It's KKK guy. You know, the Democrats were all on board with racism and slavery. So, you know, and I mean that's neither here or there. I don't think we should. I don't think we should cancel.
In Virginia that wore blackface when he was in college. We
Justin Trudeau.
We call him Governor. Yeah, just so you know, we call him Governor Blackface for that reason. So,
or you know, Justin Trudeau did the same thing. You know, blackface, and he got a pass for that. The Prime Minister of Canada or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I do think it's quite a bit easier for us. Like when push comes to shove, right? Like, because I could even say this for myself, right? Like, if I was to, you know, there's a bar downtown in a city nearby me, right? That used to have, I think it was run by like some hipsters or something, and the windows used to have these big communist hammers and sickles on them, right? Like explicit pro-communist artworks. And every so often nowadays, right, you go down there and there's people leaving like Antifa gang signs and things, you know, like the Thunderbolts, which are totally not fascist guys, right? You know, and it does kind of strike me as like, well, if I had the power to like round up all the Antifas in my backyard and, you know, get rid of their symbols and destroy the comic book shops that they hang out in, like, would I do it? And I can see the temptation. The temptation is definitely there. So I think it is when it's you and then when it's your own backyard, it's easier to be an iconoclast. But I still don't think, again, because it's this like this critical thinking, this historical perspective. Because when I look at the rest of history, when I look at any other time that iconoclasm happens, right? As long as I'm sufficiently removed from that thing, I can see it as a bad thing, right? Like I bemoan the Catholics destroying the evil, non-Christian demon worshipping, like literal demon worshipping, according to these Catholics, right? Like it wasn't just that the Incans were racist, and that's problematic. It's these Incans were worshipping demons, and that's literally evil, pure evil. But seeing that now, has memory hold their history? Yeah. Well, they've tried to. They haven't really succeeded quite yet, but they would like to. But yeah, looking back on all these historical examples of iconoclasm, I would say that it's a bad thing, and as such, because I kind of tend towards this deontological ethic kind of thing, right? Like the idea that there are rules in ethics, and that I should follow those rules regardless of their utility to me, just because they are the rules. So, in this case, I'd have to say, maybe. Like, if I see like a statue of Harriet Tubman outside, right? Like maybe I don't like feminists, but I'm not going to pull it down. I'm going to sort of leave it there for people who do enjoy feminists, maybe at the very least, to respect the indigenous people, and even with like Southerners, right? Like I'm not particularly keen on Southerners. No offense, no offense, right?
Well, I am a Yankee transplant, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, even worse than you're a carpetbagger. Oh my God. Oh, that's the worst. Get out. No, but so I think, respect the indigenous peoples.
Yeah,
respect
indigenous people. I was saying earlier, I have no love for the Confederacy, not even like oh dear lost cause sort of way.
Okay,
I don't have any of that. I don't have any of that kind of Southern connection to it. But even then, even though I have the northern view of the Confederacy, I still don't want the Confederate statues to come down. I think that's the prelude to this is year zero. We're going to start erasing history just wholesale. So, and it turns out that it has in fact been the prelude, because as soon as you start justifying taking down Robert E. Lee, then the next thing that happens is you take down Thomas Jefferson. We've seen it.
Trump said that people called him a conspiracy theorist for thinking that would be that you're a conspiracy theorist if you realize that someone thinks if A, then B, A, and then you conclude, I wonder if they're going to do B. I wonder.
Yeah. Well, that was. Did I spurge about my problems with slippery slope theory before? Or
I think we talked about that.
Yeah, because that's basically that idea, right? Like it's not a slippery slope. It's just the logical consequences of an action. All right.
Yeah.
So feminists want Margaret Sanger on the $20, but she's basically a Nazi. Yeah. Oh God, yeah, she was. Like I'm wondering when she gets cancelled.
She was not because Nazi.
I remember I did an essay in college about her, like comparing and contrasting her with Jonathan Swift's modest proposal about eating Irish babies. And it's actually shocking how similar they were. The only difference was that Jonathan Swift was being sarcastic, and his proposal for what to do with babies was actually more reasonable than Margaret Sanger's. Ultimately, I think, because at least you're getting food out of it, right? Like it's not just a waste. Whereas nowadays, it's just you get like cosmetics and stem cells out of it.
Gulliver's Travels. I read that and I thought, this is gonna be that book about the giant who gets tied down by the little people, and it's a complex, very ironic criticism of the human nature. Like, what the heck?
Yeah, he's great. I'd suggest if you've never read The Modest Proposal, give it a read sometime.
I love a modest
short essay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, anyone in chat then, if you've never read that,
a mostly peaceful proposal.
Yeah.
Mostly
go check it out. It's
Yeah. So the
Well,
whole year zero mentality, and we're going to erase things that are problematic. As soon as you establish that as a standard, then everything starts coming down. And I think that is a feature. That is a feature, not a bug, of this movement.
Well, I think my push again, going back to my galaxy brain take for the stream, is it really year zero for that, or have we been erasing history the whole time?
Oh, like were there really dinosaurs 100 years ago, and that's just something they erased and took?
Well, I mean,
forget what they took from you.
Actually, I mean, if you want to get into epistemology, like we could question whether there were in fact dinosaurs 100 years ago.
Why are there dinosaurs in all of? You're going down the creationist route already. Why are there dinosaurs on all of the medieval artworks? It doesn't make sense.
I mean, that could be part of it, right? Like, I'm not going to specifically argue that, because I think that, like, assuming that is, like, for the sake of argument, assuming that is an aspect of our history that's been erased, I think we've now come to the point where it's been so thoroughly erased that we can't even entertain the idea anymore, right? So it would be really horrific if actually Jesus was riding, a Jesus horse back in the Bible days or something.
I've been meaning to make this is a little off topic, but I need to make a virgin versus Chad meme where the virgin creationists are the one who thinks that dinosaurs didn't exist and the government made up dinosaurs, and the Chad creationists are the ones who believe that dinosaurs still exist. They're just out in the jungle somewhere and we haven't found them yet.
Oh, I used to meet a lot of furries like that, actually, like furries and scalies, and other kin too, especially like the dragon ones. They all thought like dinosaurs existed somewhere. But I mean, like even just like look at the Civil War, for example. You
the
mentioned
real one, not the Marvel one.
Yeah, like the real. Well, I mean, there's been a lot of civil wars, like, but specifically, like let's do the American Civil War. Because you right, Geek, like you mentioned that you're a Yankee and you grew up with the Yankee version of history, right?
Yeah.
But that's not the only version of history. There was a really good R.I.P. Apu, right? Apu from the Simpsons who recently got cancelled after fighting back. So moment of silence for him. But did you guys ever see that episode of The Simpsons where he tries to become a U.S. citizen?
What you're talking about, where he's becoming a citizen, and they ask him what caused the Civil War, and he's like, "Well, actually, there were lots of complex economic," and they're like, "Just say slavery."
Economic, he's rattling off all these lists of reasons for the Civil War, and then they're like, "No, just say slavery." And I mean, that's
I said it was a Yankee, but that doesn't mean I say it was just slavery. I think there were a lot of complex.
No, definitely. I mean, there were a lot of complex things, but the basic history of the Civil War, like the history that Yankees tend to get, and even people outside of America tend to get, is very simple. It's just there was slavery. Lincoln didn't want there to be slavery, and he said, "Free the blacks." And we're going to kill a bunch of Southerners to free the blacks. And that was great. Abraham Lincoln, the great Democrat, said, "Free the blacks." Yeah. Right.
At some point, he offered a compromise to the South where they would get to keep their slaves as long as they stayed in the Union.
Yeah, as long as you stay. Yeah, I mean, it was mostly... Like I would say,
getting into the real history though.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like the real history was more complex, and Lincoln's motivations were primarily about keeping the Union. But again, that history is obscured, and even more than that, right? Like, have you guys ever read Lysander Spooner? Have you heard of Lysander Spooner?
No, I haven't heard of it.
Okay, well, he is an old school anarchist, and his writings are great. I really like Lysander Spooner. He was actually kind of a forerunner of like commie wokey anarchists as well as like based libertarian anarchists. So he's somebody that I think everybody could agree with if they read his stuff, or they probably wouldn't because he's very controversial. They wouldn't agree with what he said because he's very controversial. But if if they read him enough and came to agree with him, then they would agree with him, if that makes any sense.
If they agree with him, then they agree with him.
Yeah, if they agree with him, they agree with him. That's my controversial take. But basically, some of his most famous writings were written around the time of the Civil War, and he took like completely wacky galaxy brain takes that didn't agree with the South or the North, right? Like going completely outside. There's what was it? No treason, the Constitution of No Authority, or something like that, which was basically a giant fu to the Northerners. But he also didn't like the Southerners either. So yeah, okay. Wikipedia is listing him as a libertarian socialist. He's part of a series on libertarian socialism, which I mean, I don't know, maybe. But yeah, he did some weird galaxy brain takes that you never hear in school, right?
Yeah.
And these kinds of historical narratives, like, they existed, and they're something that educated people used to know about. Some educated people still know about, not usually, unless you're into the history of anarchism.
Yeah.
And that's been obscured and erased from history. And
it's also become more accessible, right? Like now you can Google this guy, and
in a
get
sense,
his writings,
and figure it out. Like, you don't have to.
Like what I did after a conversation with Marmaduke one day, like a month or so ago. I actually went down the intellectual rabbit hole of the anti-suffragettes, the women who were who were against giving women the right to vote, and what exactly did they argue? Because like it came up in our conversation, it was like, oh shit, I actually don't know what they argued. Let me go and find out.
That sounds pretty horrible. Were they racists? What was their arguments? Was it?
I thought the suffragettes had a pretty racist element.
Oh yeah.
Why should the blacks get the vote before women?
But the anti-suffragettes, the main arguments that I found when I went down this rabbit hole is, first of all, they thought women didn't need the right to vote because women were already being treated well in society as far as they were concerned. So desiring the vote was unneeded. It was superfluous. Basically, all the issues that women were concerned about at that time were already being addressed by the men in the government. Why would we need women to participate?
Well, that's interesting, because there's actually something I've been wondering about lately. Kind of kicking around and exploring, specifically with like male privilege, right? We live in a male privileged society, and it's male privilege to do all these things. Like, what if, right? Like, I was a Martian, and I came down, and the only thing I knew, like the first lesson I got was about male privilege and the status of privilege, and then I was asked to look at the history of the aristocracy and the proletariat, right? What would be the conclusion I would reach in regards to the power dynamic between the aristocracy and the proletariat?
Well, you'd probably conclude that wealth / inherited status is a more important social strata or determinant factor than, I would say, probably more important than race, or sex.
I don't think so.
Really?
Because I think, like, if we look at the narrative of male privilege, right? Why are males privileged? Why are they the gender that has the power?
Well, in the feminist narrative, it would be males have access to political power, right?
Yeah, well, they
combined with men beat up their wives. Essentially, the men do bad things.
They get drunk, and that's why we have to ban alcohol, right? But I mean, the thing is, like, when you look at a man, right? Like, what typifies the male gender role is that the man leaves home, right? Like, the women in a traditional gender role, women's purview is the home and the family and keeping the house, and the men's purview
This is why
is
the
the
heroine's
outside
journey
world.
was all about
Yeah.
At the con that I was at recently, we had a panel in which the heroes versus the hero's journey versus the heroine's journey was brought up. And not a lot of people know about the heroine's journey, but the heroine's journey is basically the heroine gets ripped from her home, and the point of the story is to restore the home to what it should be. Versus the hero's journey, which is you go out into the world and you make your place in the world, right?
Yeah, Alice in Wonderland. She falls into Wonderland. I'm clicking with that.
Yeah, it's the external versus the internal, and the settled versus the unsettled, and the thing with men, right? Like you look at all these, like the early feminist critiques of like how would we empower women? It's by allowing women to leave the home and do labor, right? And traditionally they focus on like status jobs, right? Like you never tell a little girl, oh, one day you can grow up to work at McDonald's.
You can be a truck driver if you want.
Yeah, you could be a truck driver, or maybe fix plumbing,
or a sewer inspector.
Shoulder pads and business suits. Yeah,
but I mean that is kind of the implication, right? This is part of the aspect of manhood, is going out and having these careers, very often shitty careers that they don't actually want to do. And my question would be, like, vis-a-vis like the aristocracy versus the proletariat, right? This is a very similar dynamic, right? Like men and women, the old traditional social contract between men and women was that women would stay home and men would provide the women with the things that they needed to do to kind of keep society ordered and running, right? And this is exactly the same dynamic between the aristocracy and the proletariat, right? Like the social contract, or the alleged social contract between the peasants and the aristocracy, is that the aristocracy would sit at home in their castles, and then the peasants would go out into the field and they would correct all the crops, and they would do the things, they would fight the wars and do the things that they needed to do, so that therefore they could bring the wealth back to the aristocracy, and the aristocracy would be supported as they keep the home safe, they keep society safe and controlled. So in many ways, like this notion that traditional males are the privileged ones in this relationship is really weird. Because if we try and extrapolate that same logic, that same narrative out to the aristocracy versus the proletariat, then the only conclusion I think we can reach is that actually the proletariat is the privileged one, because they are the ones, that get to be drafted and get to be a
fighting
soldier
and dying in wars. And
I would think that the privilege would be to be able to stay home and not get shot at by the Taliban, right? Or to be able to stay with your kids, because really, like, if you ask a man, right, like look at bugmen and neets, right, like all these people who don't work and just kind of sit around, why do they do it? If work is so important, wouldn't they just want to go out and work? I think it's actually the other way around.
I'm curious, Punchy. Is this your own conclusions on feminism, or did you fall down like the MRA rabbit hole too?
Well, I'm not sure. Maybe I think maybe it does dovetail with some MRAs or MGTOWs or something. But if that's the case, I think they might have a good point in this regard. Because when you look at, like,
I don't think they're wrong there. I don't think that as a woman, I don't think they're wrong there.
When you look at labor,
it is kind of gynocentric, our society. It's all about elevating and protecting the woman.
Yeah, it very, very much. Yeah. I mean, the whole point of working is so you can so you can provide for your family, right? So like, if you don't have a family to provide for, why bother working? Why not just stay at home and eat chicken tenders and play video games all day, right? Like, enjoy yourself.
So maybe something touchy that brings up, though, is maybe the problem of human nature as a limitation, right? Like, if you cannot, barring a scientific dystopia where you grow babies in artificial wombs or something, you cannot undo like the biological facts of life that make child labor a much more intense problem for a woman than for a man, right? So if you have basically these like, is it all society, right, or is it evolution? Is it nature that makes us organize a certain way? So if the king is the father, and the good king serves the role of a role for the country that a good father serves for his family, can you ever get away from the idea of kingship if you can't get away from the idea of fatherhood itself as something intensely important and human? Can we like are we is our nature making us stuck in a point where, you know, sorry about your anarchist utopia, but the second you have your anarchist utopia, people are going to want the big daddy king to protect them, right? So we'll be right back to the Iron Ages and the biblical times of Israel wanting a king. Yeah. The judges weren't doing the job they wanted them to do.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, well, you saw stuff like this with like all the autonomous zones that were cropping up in the wake of COVID and Trump and all the riots over the last couple of years, right? Like they start out as anarchists and then gradually they turn into mini police states.
Punchy, I wanted to dovetail with like your hobbits as anarchists take you had last stream, because I actually sat and thought about that for a week afterwards, right? So the thing is, what kind of like annoyed me and interested me about it was, like I've seen like the hobbits as anarchist themes. They have like a little bailiff who goes around. There's basically no hobbit government, but they're also technically under the dominion of the kings of Gondor, even if the king of Gondor,
well, that's what Gondor says.
Gondor it's a really weird.
Gondor doesn't actually have any authority.
Them, though. So it's a weird setup where it's simultaneously anarchist and monarchist at the same time. And then when I reread it, I noticed there's this whole theme between Éowyn and Faramir that's left out of the movies, where it kind of brings into question. Like, I'm surprised they left this out, because it's sort of like the whole crux of Éowyn's character is initially she wants to be a man. She's afraid of being a housewife and never having the opportunity for glory. She does go out and fight and gets glory because a hobbit helps her, but she ends up marrying Faramir, who, unlike Boromir, is nervous about valuing being a soldier for the sake of being a soldier. Boromir sees being a soldier and fighting Mordor as this grand, noble, glorious thing. Faramir is worried that love of being the strong soldier, will overtake love of the thing that they're defending. That soldiery and masculine virtue is noble because of the peace and quiet they're defending from Sauron. And the two characters literally end up marrying, and there's sort of two different ideas of the masculine, of sort of a man who's learned maybe like a feminine caution of the masculine, and a woman who's desired her own expression of the masculine role, right? So I think for Tolkien, it's like a big deal that in his ideal world, the king exercises his power correctly, which means that the people are basically in a free anarchist state, right? It's sort of like everything is about finding the right balance between these two extremes, because one extreme creates a situation where the other extreme has to come in. Hobbits who don't care about the outside world, the anarchists who don't care about the outside world, create a situation where they're weak against Mordor, and maybe a Denethor will become a tyrant unless they're saved by a good king. I was mulling over that all week, and it kind of dovetailed nicely. So there we go. That's
so basically, let me see if I get this right. What you're saying is that the whole Éowyn thing is like a Hegelian dialectic between a soy boy and G.I. Jane. Is that?
but but then Faramir actually is bold. He actually does go like patrol and hunt orcs.
Okay, so
stuff.
he's like an Antifa soy boy, like soy boy who joins Antifa, and then
You're doing this. So what you're
Meets up
saying
with
thing is Kathy Griffin or
I guess. But yeah, I guess so. My only issue there would be again, I would like to point out that it is not the king that saves the world.
Yeah,
it's
Frodo
the drug
and ironically
addict
Gollum
and the
saves
humble,
the world. Yeah.
Yeah, it is the humble anarchist doing the right thing and being kind to the greedy drug addict who can't quite get over his demons, right? Those are the pair that save the world. Plus,
what I'm trying to get at
the
is
ambiguously gay.
The king is in service to that, right?
Yeah.
So they actually are the substance. The hobbits are the substance or the shapers of the world. And the king, ironically, is someone, the good king correctly understands his role is to serve them, right? And it's sort of like getting back to like our education talk. One of the problems is, well, how do you navigate these problems where there are different interpretations? Okay, well, we could look at the facts, but there are different ways of interpreting facts, and there are different ways of choosing which facts. Okay, well, then use a value system to choose the facts that are most important, but there are competing value systems. If Hobbiton is the ideal libertarian, anarchist, small town conservative world, a ridiculously important dimension of that is
It's idyllic Britain. It's that British town that they went to when they were going to bulldoze it for the nice, right? That kind of thing.
Right. And so the community has to have like a love for it's the members of the community. I guess that's one weird thing about like so is the libertarian anarchist society, is it a global libertarian anarchist society, or is it a bunch of little patches of people?
I think it would end up being.
I mean, are you asking me, or are you asking like libertarian anarchists in general? Because
I'm more like question for the world, you know.
I mean, again, my own perspective, like I can't speak for anybody else, but I'm a voluntarist, right? So I would say that it would have to be everybody deciding for themselves, right? Ultimately,
And
a lot
like
of little
150 people bands, basically.
Yeah, like it could be little. Like you could have your underground city, underground BioShock city, but you could also have your totalitarian tanky community where everybody worships Stalin. You could have your white power community. You could have your like let's all worship Robert E. Lee community. You could have like a hardcore Christian community, hardcore Muslim community. You could have any kind of community you want, as long as all the participants are doing so voluntarily and of their own free will. So that would be my perspective.
I've been thinking about that in relation to kind of sort of like the Catholic Protestant divide. Getting back to that, so like the Benedict option. Have you read the Benedict option, Punchy?
No, I don't think so. Who's that?
What's his name? Crime Think.
Crime Think.
I can't recall off the top of my head.
All right.
Oh, good.
But basically, the idea of Punchy is that since the current establishment right now is so hostile to Christian ideas, Christians should just form their own parallel communities that don't engage with those institutions at all.
Oh, okay. Like kind of like the Christian flag movement from some years back.
That would be more of an American evangelical Protestant kind of cultural thing, yeah. And I think that a dimension of
option's a little more Catholic, but yeah.
And a reason the Benedict option it was a Catholic book, and it caused a stir where Protestants were reading it and thinking about it too. He was basically also making the argument that I don't think we can save Western civilization. So if Ben Shapiro writes a book about the SJWs, and at the end he writes, here are top 10 ways Ben Shapiro thinks we can save Western civilization, the Benedict option idea is maybe this ship is sinking, and so we need private. In his case, it would be like private Catholic communities that create a Catholic space outside of the
well, I mean,
Western madness. Yeah.
Like that's
like
historically
the-
what happened during the Dark Ages, isn't
Yeah.
it? You know, the Christian community
Yeah.
wasn't able to save Rome, but it was able to save itself and survive
Yeah.
and carry forward the ideals of Rome to be rediscovered in future generations during the Renaissance, right?
Right. And then the problem I keep thinking about is what's an armistice look like? Like what stops the tankies from saying, "Hey, we've got all these tanks. Let's go invade the libertarian anarchists, and
Well-
then we'll make them join the tanky."
Okay,
the
well,
tanky
and specifically with that, yeah. Again, I mean, you know, I think that like tankies, specifically, like they wouldn't be able to take libertarians because libertarians are too good with guns.
I think that's like
compared to
specifically. Actually, that's a specifically libertarian thing. Is yeah, just give us a bulldozer and we'll have a tank.
Yeah, well, I think, but I was going to say specifically with tankies and Christians, you know, I wouldn't be overly worried about that because even like the genuine tankies, right, like the Stalinists and stuff, they weren't able to destroy Christianity. Religion still exists in China. China went back to religion after suppressing it for decades, right? Like if you look at China nowadays, like they're more capitalist and they're more based than even, you know, the most capitalist and based people in the United States. Like weirdly enough, even though they're controlled nominally by commies. Have you guys seen? I think I've plugged his channel before, but Ramsey Dewey. He's an MMA coach guy who does like podcasts and videos and things. Are
I'm
you
not
familiar with him?
No. Sorry.
Okay, well, the interesting thing with him is he's an expat who lives in Shanghai. So he kind of brings like a Chinese perspective to the rest of the world. And one of the things that he often speaks about is the official Chinese government's attitudes towards specifically with Ramsey, it's towards MMA and martial arts because you know, at the risk of sounding racist, you know, Asian people do like martial arts, right? Like it's important. They have a long history of kung fu and these traditional martial arts, right? And China has actually started to enforce those traditions, actually quite strongly, to the point where you know, if you try and challenge the cultural traditions of Chinese traditional martial arts, as well as medicines and science and stuff, you can face some pretty heavy government repercussions. There's a famous case of a mixed martial artist who wanted to engage in like Bushido fights. Do you guys know about Bushido?
It's like an internet slang for BS martial arts, right?
Yeah, and they have this kind of like skeptic movement where martial artists will go out and they'll test things that they think are Bushido and see if it's like a real martial art, if it'll really work in a fight, if it'll really work in a sparring or something like that, right? You know, it kind of like a mixture between like Richard Dawkins and Joe Rogan. But basically, like there was this guy who would go out and he'd book fights with various different traditional Chinese grandmasters, like Ki masters and Tai Chi masters and you know, Shaolin monk masters and things. And he'd get into like actual sparring MMA fights, and he just absolutely mop the floor with them. I'd suggest looking him up if you can. I don't know the name offhand. I'll see if I can find the name.
Stephen Crowder has told stories about this, where like MMA became a testing ground for all the ancient martial arts systems of the world. Yeah,
yeah, I could expect that because Crowder's got that kind of like jock, you know, jock boy kind of persona. So I'm sure he's cued into that. But this guy, like, what really interests me though is what happened to him afterwards. because he had these high profile fights against Chinese masters and completely humiliated them. But then the Chinese government cracked down on him. Like you get this impression that because they're communists, right? Like they're going to be all progressive and scientific, and well, we're going to beat the religious people up, and that's going to be great. But no, they saw him beating up Tai Chi, woo woo kung fu masters, and they're like, you are insulting the Chinese people and the Chinese spirit and the racial purity of the Han and all this kind of stuff. So he's been fined. He's got this thing where like he can still fight professionally, but he has to do like a pro wrestler thing where he comes out like a heel and people boo him. He's got to wear like this clown makeup and stuff to kind of belittle him.
Basically, what we're circling around is the fact that even in communist systems that are theoretically supposed to be internationalists, that old natural human nature instinct towards nationalism still
reasserts itself. And it doesn't just still assert itself, like it reasserts itself. Like during Mao, there was a attempt, right? Like I think we're living through a kind of wokey cultural revolution right now, right? Like the wokies are really trying to push their top down, to push like a top down reimagining of society.
We're going to erase everything.
Yeah, like erase everything, do all this stuff.
Of reason in France or something like that. Yeah.
But again,
we're going to have a new calendar, new everything. Yeah.
Yeah, the French tried that too with the French Civil War, with the French Revolution. We're going to all be Thermidor and everything. But you look at these systems and time again they reassert the old order, and China is probably one of the biggest examples of that today. I mean, it took when did Deng Xiaoping come to power? Like the 1980s or something, 1970s, somewhere around there. It took at least like 20 or 30 years for that cultural shift from like woke China to based China. But it definitely happened, and nowadays China is one of the main reasons that they're so powerful these days. This is actually one of the things Ron Paul was spurging about 15 years ago, that people were making fun of him, and now they're eating crow. But is the fact that China does have this very strong conservative capitalist streak to it, that has reasserted itself even after wokies. So I guess I'd liken it to like a forest fire, maybe, right? The woods burn down, but the woods grow back afterwards, right? And they grow back stronger. So I wouldn't be super overly concerned about tankies winning history. Like I think Orwell was very pessimistic. But even in Orwell's time, like as I've been arguing all along, like I think Orwell was describing the world as he saw it back in those days, right? Like the things that were going on in 1984 were like 1940, whatever it was. But in many ways, like we've come out of that, and we have things like the internet where people can now examine 1984 and question history in a way that we've never been able to question history before, right? We've also got controls on the internet that are coming in that are going to be making it even harder to question history than it has been before, right? Make it even easier to push. So there's this constant push and pull, but I think history is cyclical enough, and human nature is such a way that just as you're never going to have the good guys win and evil's vanquished forever, you're never going to have the bad guys win and good is vanquished forever either. So that would be my.
That's a great white pill to end on, because what we're seeing right now is a lot of 1984 reminiscent things where we have people literally rewriting the dictionary so that the cathedral favored definition
Oh,
of
God.
vaccination, what's in the dictionary. So we have all that stuff going on, but I think we can take the white pill and say that
Oh, God.
as far as
I didn't.
see that sort of movement never lasts for long, and eventually human nature reasserts itself.
What did they change the definition of vaccine to? I didn't hear about that.
They changed it to instead of saying something that prevents, right? It's something that mitigates, essentially.
Okay. Well, actually, I mean,
this vaccine that doesn't actually prevent can now be just. Oh, we're about to get canceled again because I'm going to say this vaccine does not perfectly prevent the transmission of.
Well,
COVID.
yeah, I would actually
vaccine.
I'd say that's probably better because that is more accurate to what a vaccine actually is. It doesn't prevent, it just mitigates the damage that happens. But yeah, I mean, I was thinking more like things like retconning racism.
Your traditional vaccines prevent you from actually, generally speaking, prevent you from manifesting the symptoms unless you really are immunocompromised, right? If you're vaccinated against polio, if you contract the infection of polio, you will not manifest the symptoms of polio.
Yeah, well, those are really good vaccines.
Yeah,
those are the vaccines that we want to point to.
Yeah. So, like, the old definition basically said something to that effect. Like, the really, really good vaccines do that. And now we have loosened what counts as a vaccine.
Oh, okay.
In the official dictionary.
You're acknowledging that crap vaccines are now crap vaccines, and you're trying to weasel your way in through that, right? Is what you're saying?
Yeah. So that we can basically ignore the fact that this is a crap vaccine. Yeah.
Well, you never know. I mean, given the fact that they haven't been tested very much, maybe in 5 years' time we'll discover that everyone gets superpowers and they can all fly now.
If you just take it twice a month for life, yeah.
Oh, well, that's exciting because I did in fact get the original 2 shots for the Moderna vaccine. Because I thought at the time it was kind of a good idea given the health conditions I have and the medications that I have to take. But now, like, I've been telling people I wish I could take that back just to spite all these people who are trying to force it on people. But
Well, what I would do would be, like, my own personal advice for everyone. You can take it or leave it. Like, get the vaccine if you're in any kind of risk group or people who are in risk groups.
Yeah.
But then don't tell people. Tell people you're not vaccinated, right?
Yeah.
Refuse the card. Get the vaccine, but refuse the card, and tell people to go fuck themselves.
Yeah,
that might be the best of both worlds.
And don't patronize any establishments that demand that you show your papers in order to come in.
Papers, please.
Papers, please. I was looking the other day at the Kennedy Center website because I was thinking, I could take Mama Geek to a show or something like that. But then I looked and said, proof of vaccination required. I was like, well, nope, not doing that. Because I'm sticking to my principles and I'm not going to any place that says you have to prove you're vaccinated. Screw that. Get fucked. I'll have to get my theater fixed some other way. All right, so I do in fact have to finish right about now because
we're coming up on.
I think we covered every possible galaxy brain meme macro there could be. Right?
Well, we started. There's actually a whole bunch more that I could say about that because I still have to say why I'm wrong about 1984 being about the present. But I don't know. Did you guys want to do any more on 1984? Or do you want to move on to a different?
I think after 7 hours is probably time to move on.
Yeah.
So. But yeah, so the 7 hours of discussion, the discussion inspired by 1984, hopefully will satisfy our audience. And probably the next time we do a dystopian stream, it will be some other book. I was actually thinking of that Super Cans book because it's COVID relevant. Possibly could be our next one, or as you suggested earlier, Idiocracy could be another one too. So,
well, actually, another thing I was thinking was because I know Marmaduke is a video game nerd. I don't know if you, right, Geek, are quite as nerdy on video games, but Deus Ex, especially in light with all this kind of religious people versus irreligious people, Christians fighting against the wokies kind of thing. But I don't know. It's something you guys could consider, I guess.
All right, video game utopias. Yeah, got it.
Yeah, have you
gamer content.
Have you ever played Deus Ex? Or,
No, I
think specifically
so
Deus Ex.
I am the most 30-year-old boomer ever. I'm still trying to beat Chrono Trigger from the Super Nintendo.
Oh, you still haven't finished it? Oh.
Nah.
Okay, well, I can give you tips because I played the hell out of that. But
Well, but what my reasoning is, if I can get 2 pages done a week, I'll reward myself with Chrono Trigger, and then I hit 1 page a week and say, I haven't earned Chrono Trigger yet.
All right. Well, I'm specifically thinking of Deus Ex 2, but we could go over that. Figure out something.
Weren't you guys talking about BioShock in a previous stream too?
Yeah,
Ayn Rand dystopia.
That's like an Ayn Rand dystopia. I don't actually think it's very Ayn Rand. I keep hearing nerds whenever you mention Ayn Rand to nerds, they're always like, "Oh yeah, like BioShock." But it was specifically set up to be a critique of Ayn Rand, though. That was the selling point. So a lot we could do. Maybe people in chat could say what they want us to do.
I also
you could hold like a poll.
I also feel like I want to do some comic streams at some point too, because I'm building up commentary on various different comics.
Do you want to do more dystopian comics or just like general comic stuff?
Some general comics. Like I would like to do a discussion of Common America, for example.
Okay.
Yeah, which is really, really good, and I would like to do a discussion on my channel about that. And then also just more general, like what's going on at Marvel and DC and so on. Just because I don't really have anyone, I'm in the middle of nowhere, and I don't really have anyone to talk about comics with. So
that would be your buddy. Yeah,
rely on the internet to do that.
Yeah, that'd be fun. I mean, if you want to do stuff that's not specifically related to dystopians, like that would be fine too.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if Common America is dystopian. I haven't read it. I do know that's the one with the great big problematics on her chest, right? I think is that
she's got problematics on her chest. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's the one I've never actually read it, but I've seen you posting about it on Twitter and as well.
Yeah. It's good, and it's the writers are directly targeting things that are going on in our society right now, but they're doing it in a fairly subtle way, in a very well done way. So yeah, I would like to do a stream on that. I would like to do a video or a stream on Demon in a Bottle, the Iron Man classic, because I've needed to do that for a while and I haven't yet. So
yeah, we kind of got off topic on Iron Man for a while, didn't we?
Yeah.
I need to get
back to talk about Iron Man. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, if you like Iron Man, I guess we could talk about Iron Man. I've never heard about Iron Man before, but I have to check it out.
Iron Man. We could do Demon in a Bottle, then Denny O'Neil's run, then Armor Wars, the other famous one, right?
Yeah. Just let me know whatever you'd be interested in.
All the classics. Actually, Marm and I were doing Can't Well until I lost interest in it,
Cantwell.
And with Cantwell, we were
Iron
to cleanse our
Soy.
palate. Iron Soy, yeah. After Iron Soy, to cleanse our palate, we were looking at comics from Tales of Suspense, the very very first Iron Man stories, and having fun with those. So
okay, yeah, that might be.
Yeah.
Well, when did those come out? Because Tales of Suspense was really old.
Yeah,
I remember that
1963. Yeah, Tales of Suspense was around since like the 50s, I think. But
Yeah.
Iron Man first appeared in that comic in 1963.
Yeah, because were they?
So-
Didn't they used to do like pre-code kind of stuff, or were they like the post-code kind of nostalgia for pre-code things, or?
Well, by the time Iron Man came around, it was code, but
Okay.
I think that it did. I think that Tales of Suspense, its existence did extend into the pre-code era. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm really fond of that sort of stuff. Like I'm a huge I'm a nerd, a reprobate nerd. But yeah, well, just give me a reading list of stuff you'd like to discuss, or watching list if you wanted to do stuff, and we'll hatch it out. So
After identifying the New World Order, we need to read some comic books to restore our souls.
Well, figure out where
Shut out
those
the
are in the
existential
comic
dread.
books.
Like classic comic books, not modern comic books. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, I do have to go, but thank you everyone for listening to this stream, and to all of you who will be listening asynchronously later. Thank you to Warzord and Matt for dropping by briefly while the stream was in session. Thank you very much, and we'll keep you posted as far as what's coming up in future streams on this channel.
Hey, thanks for having us, Right Geek? It was a blast.
Yes, thanks.
You're welcome.
It was
Thank
great, and we
coming.
survived. We have
Yes,
we have not been stuck in the rat pits just quite yet. So
Yeah.
hopefully we will continue to resist.
FBI, open up.
Someone didn't throw a switch and shut us down, so
Yeah, they're going to shadman us.
All right, yeah. Especially when I start talking about vaccines at the end. So thank you very much.
Warzord says bye.
Have a
Bye,
good
Warzord.
evening, and once again we'll keep you posted on what's coming up. Thank you very much.
Later.
Bye.